Okay, the date is September 19th, 2024. I'm Hansen Sue here with Evelyn Van Orden. Welcome.
Thank you.
To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Aurora, Colorado, which for most of my life no one had ever heard of, but it's become infamous because of a shooting there. And in fact, it was in the news just this morning, that location. It's my father was in the Marine Corps and was stationed near there. And that's it. Well, we stayed there. We stayed in Aurora until we moved when I was 3 to Santa Ana, California. And most of my childhood was spent in Santa Ana until we moved in, I think I was just before 5th grade, to Los Angeles because my father had to retire from the Marine Corps because it was the time of the Vietnam War. And I'm the oldest of 6 children, and one of his friends who had a large family was sent to Vietnam. He wanted to stay in the Marines his entire career, but he was forced to retire for his family's sake. And then he remade himself by going to school and learning how to operate computers and a little bit about software later on. My mother is Austrian. She's second-generation Austrian. Was born in Chicago, but moved to Los Angeles. Her family moved to Los Angeles when she was very young, and actually lived in a house, an old craftsman home, right above Sunset Boulevard near the Whiskey A Go-Go in Hollywood. And then other people in the family, when they grew up, some of them stayed in that area, and my mother ended up, she actually was the only one in my family of 8 before me who went to college. My father didn't have the opportunity. He had to leave his home in Montana at a very young age because of physical abuse, and that's why he enlisted in the Marine Corps. My mother went to college at Mount St. Mary's and became a social worker in East LA. So she was a career woman. And she didn't marry my father until she was 27 years old, which was considered to be like an old maid in those years, a career woman in those days. I was born on December 20th, 1955, when my mother was 29 years old. And at that time, we were living in Santa Ana, where my father was stationed at El Toro Marine Base, which no longer exists now. I think it's been shut down. So,
How did your parents meet?
They met in Hollywood. My mother loved to go out with her sisters and their husbands and friends to clubs. We're very active social life. And one day my mother met my father at one of these clubs. And he was in the Marine Corps, and he may have even been dressed in uniform. I'm not sure about that. But they started dating, and I'm not sure how long they dated, but they got married and settled down. And my mother, of course, resigned from her career. And then when they married, when she was 27, and he was 26, I believe, and then my mother had me when she was 29 years old, and then 5 more kids after me for 10 years. So there's a 10-year span between me, the oldest, and the youngest. And my name is Evelyn. All of our names start with E. My mother is Eleanor. My father is Elmer. Then there's Evelyn, Edward, Elizabeth, Eric, Earl, and Elliot. Boka. Our last name was Boka. And I believe on my LinkedIn page it says Evelyn and in parentheses Boka and then Van Orden.
Oh. So, okay, so Van Orden is your
my married name,
yeah,
yes.
Okay. So you mentioned you've already talked about your parents' occupations and siblings. Any religious or political beliefs in your family?
Yes, my family is extremely Catholic. Now, I went to private schools, Catholic schools, elementary, except for 1 year when we moved to Los Angeles. And I believe the move to the house, we had a beautiful 2-story craftsman home in a nice, quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles near the Hollywood freeway. And I believe that I'm putting 2 and 2 together to figure out that my parents probably didn't have a lot of money to pay for our tuition for 6 kids in private school after buying that house. This was right after my dad was forced to retire from the Marines. So we moved from Santa Ana to Los Angeles because my uncle, Walter, gave my father a job so that he could make an income and figure out what he was going to do next. And that lasted for several years, but it didn't work out well, him working for a relative. They clashed a bit. So he looked for a new career after that. So, yes, so I was talking about the Catholic religion. I was brought up Catholic, and we were a very close-knit family, which, like it takes a village to raise a child. Our family, my immediate family, did not have a lot of money, but we had a wonderful extended family that all lived in the area and helped take care of us. Grandma, Aunt Marie, who's my godmother, her husband, Uncle Walter, and Marie and Walter had their own business in Hollywood, a collection agency. And I'll talk about that later on. And then Aunt Jo and Uncle Bruno had 2 kids, Robert and Arlene, my cousins, and we grew up together. And there were others, Uncle Frank and Aunt Ronnie, that lived in North Hollywood. Back before it was called NoHo. It was just a little, bedroom community, and they had a 1-story tract home there, and we'd go to their house and swim in their swimming pool. It was a treat in the summertime.
What were your favorite subjects in school?
Always math and science. I have a knack for math. Numbers, always numbers in my head. When I walk up and down stairs, I count them. The reason is when we lived in our craftsman home, there were no lights on the staircase. And so I had to count the steps. Couldn't see, I had to count them. And so from then on, I can tell you how many steps there are in the places I usually go to. Math came easiest to me. I've always loved science, but I like every subject. There isn't a subject that bored me, except maybe a little bit of history when they were just making you memorize dates. I wanted to know the stories more than the dates. The dates were just a way to fit them in context of history.
And what sorts of books did you read or media did you consume?
I, of course, loved learning, loved all my textbooks, would do my homework very fast, and then read on my own for fun. And I'm the only one in my family that enjoys reading except for my mother. And my mother loved murder mysteries, and also she loved the old black and white movies, and she would have me watch the classics with her on TV on the weekends, and then sometimes read the books. And one of our relatives gave us copies of the Reader's Digest condensed books of the classics. So I read a lot of the classics at a very young age, a condensed version through that. Because we didn't have money to buy books or magazines, so they would be handed down in my family. And the magazines I loved because they had crafts in them. And I've been crafting and making things since I was a child. So I loved school, I loved reading, but none of the other people in my family liked to read except for me.
And what were your hobbies growing up?
Crafts, reading, shopping. I learned to shop at a very young age with the women in my family and the girls. On the weekends, we would go out, and often we would be in Hollywood, like where the Beverly Center is now, in that whole area. I remember going to Rexall Drugs, I think it's still there, and other places, but we were bargain shoppers. And it was like a sport to get the best deal for the best price that you possibly could. Now, my Aunt Marie, my godmother, actually started my jewelry collection because the day I was born, she gave me a heart locket, which I still have and wear to this day. Growing up, because she and my Uncle Walter, her husband, had the business in Hollywood, a collection agency, they knew they were very social with a lot of the people that worked in Hollywood. And one of those people was Hollywood Jeweler, the owner of Hollywood Jeweler. That was the name of the business. And when the stars would hit hard times, they would sell their jewelry. And he would buy it and call up my Aunt Marie and Uncle Walter and say, I've got some deals for you. They would buy beautiful pieces, some vintage pieces of fine jewelry. And as a teenager, they would give them to me for Christmas, birthday, because they knew I appreciated it. Always go to the rummage sales at the church and buy up bits and pieces of jewelry. And if I saw a garment that had interesting buttons and the garment wasn't very good, I would just buy it for 50 cents and take the buttons off and keep them. And I still have a lot of those buttons and jewelry bits in my collection. And I'm still making jewelry, but also collecting fine jewelry as a result of that.
Do you have any influential teachers or mentors or role models?
Yes, in high school. I went to the most wonderful high school, Immaculate Heart High School on Franklin and Western in Hollywood. High school to many stars. Meghan Markle, a few years ago, gave the graduation speech while she was still a princess, and it was done remotely from London. She's an alum. That school was an extremely special place. Yes, they were nuns or ex-nuns who were very progressive. And they believed, and it's an all young women's school, high school. Now they also have a middle school. And they believed that, they taught us, women can do anything, can pursue any career, but you must also always be involved in community service and never be afraid to try new things or to read. I wanted to learn French, but I didn't have any more open slots in my schedule. So the French teacher taught me French at lunchtime once a week. I think the people at my high school knew that I was working for my aunt and uncle, Aunt Marie and Uncle Walter, at their office in Hollywood and earning money during the summers to pay my own tuition at the high school. And they also knew that I needed extra money for books and things. So they employed me typing. I was a very good typist, typing mimeographs back in the day when that's how you handed out coursework and homework and tests. So you type on a mimeograph, and if you make a mistake, you can't really correct it very easily. So I was very accurate and very fast, and they paid me a little bit. And they kind of watched over me because I would be the first one to arrive at high school. I'd ride my bike there or take the bus. And I got to know the janitors. It was a way for me to escape a very loud, noisy household and just get there and have some quiet time on my own. Because at home, I was expected to help raise the young ones, do the housework, do the chores. And I've since learned that there's something called an eldest daughter syndrome. So I was kind of a victim of that, doing a lot of work and not getting any of the credit. So I would go to high school was my escape, and my friends. So wonderful. We had our 50th reunion last year, and I reunited with my best friends. And it was as if no time had passed. And now some of them are helping me start my foundation. And we'll talk more about that later.
Great. Who were your heroes growing up?
Teachers, and Aunt Marie, and my grandma. My grandma taught me to crochet when I was 7 years old. And my Aunt Jo taught me how to embroider and hand sew, and I would make all Christmas ornaments out of felt and things, and so they taught me things. And I got to go stay at Grandma's house right above the Whiskey A Go-Go. Over the weekend. You can imagine what sounds I heard from the front bedroom I was staying in at 2 a.m. with people coming out of the Whiskey A Go-Go and shouting and breaking bottles and the police coming and stuff. It was quite, as a 7-year-old, that was quite an experience. But her house was safe, relatively safe. It was far enough away. And then staying with Aunt Jo and my cousin Arlene. Arlene is 9 days younger than me, and we grew up being best friends. And she never came to stay with me. Our house was too full already and too noisy. I went to stay with her because they had a house in Beverly Hills, and it was a vacation for me. And so it was just her and her brother and Aunt Jo. And their father, my cousin's father, Uncle Bruno, was very busy, always working. He was the maitre d' I believe it was the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and knew all the stars and never talked about any of it. And was never home for holidays because he was at the restaurant, serving serving everyone. But it was quite a fascinating home, beautiful home. And I learned some cooking and baking from Aunt Jo, who knew all of the Austrian recipes and taught me a lot, because her daughter Arlene couldn't care less about cooking and couldn't care less about crafts or sewing. So Aunt Jo always wanted me to come so she could teach me. And she also taught me needlepoint.
So you've already mentioned some work experience. Did you have any other sort of jobs or work experience, growing up or in high school?
In high school, I was in the summers working for Aunt Marie and Uncle Walter, and I would work during the summers in their office, which was right near Hollywood Boulevard and Vine Street. And I would walk up to Hollywood Boulevard and go fetch coffee and lunch and stuff like that. That was an experience working in that area, which is looked completely different from the way it looks now, because they've built up a lot of the area and it's different. But that was fun. And also during the school year, I would do typing. The summer between my graduating from elementary school 8th grade and going into high school 9th grade, I took summer school classes at Hollywood High to learn to type and to take my civics class to get out of the way. So I would go there in the morning, take my 2 classes, and then walk across the street to my aunt and uncle's office and work there. And so that was it. I was working mostly for them. Of course, I did a lot of chores at home and helped out. I tutored and did help my siblings with homework. So I've always been kind of interested in teaching. I have a knack for it. And they liked me because I'm very good with kids. I like to play with kids. And they liked me. And I was a good babysitter for them. And I also babysat for a family. When I was in high school, I babysat for a family of 7 kids because no one else could do it. So those were my jobs, is working in the office and helping at home, and sometimes working at the high school. And babysitting.
So this was the jewelry business?
I've never had a jewelry business.
Oh, no, your aunt.
They would buy jewelry from this person they knew through their social circles of businesses in Hollywood.
That wasn't their business, though.
No, their business is a collection agency. When they had different accounts. They had some Gardena casino accounts where people would write bad checks. So they would try to collect on those checks. Also, the Kinney Shoes account, and people would write bad checks to buy shoes. And so there's a process you go through that by law of how you can ask for the money. And sometimes if it was a lot of money, they would file a judgment and legal papers. And I was the typist because I was so accurate. And back then you used carbon copies on legal papers. It was an original and 2 or 3 copies. So if you made a mistake, you couldn't just erase it. You had to start over that whole form, and they were long legal forms. So I was very good at typing, which turned out to be a very useful skill getting into computer science later on, software, Yeah. It was good.
Yeah. So so what year did you go to college?
High school was 69 through 73, and I went to USC on full scholarship from 73 to 77, and I was in the second undergraduate class that USC had in computer science. They had started that undergraduate program the year before, and all of my classes were master's level classes because they didn't have any separate classes for undergrad. That is the main reason I didn't go for a master's, because I had already taken all those classes, although I did apply to Stanford and to UC Irvine and was accepted at both places. And I thought, well, if I'm accepted at Stanford and I ever want to go there, it'll be easier to get in later on, was my theory of applying. And also to challenge myself to see if they would accept me in their program, which they did. But I did not take advantage of it. I wanted to stay in Southern California because my husband was here and he had his own business here later on.
Right. So how did you decide you wanted to go into computer science?
I took a computer programming class when I was in high school. Before that, we had one of those programmable calculators, Olivetti. I believe you have one the same or very similar to that, the one I used in high school. And I mastered that in about a week along with my friend Michelle, my best friend. And so they sent us up to Immaculate Heart College up the hill, which I had never been to before, because they had a PDP-8. And I learned to program that and to punch the paper tape and feed it into the computer. And my father encouraged me because he was at that time either learning to become a computer operator or was already one at Hughes Aircraft in El Segundo. And he was proud that I was interested in that. He would bring home output from the computer printers and stuff, those fan-folded pages, and show me what he was working on. And he was trained as an operator. That was his job. But he could debug stuff. And he not only that, he could fix the machines. My dad could fix anything. And that's why one of the reasons I married Mark, my husband, he can fix anything too. Hardware, software, plumbing, electrical, anything in a home, anything. Both of them. So that's what my husband and my dad had in common.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you decided, even though you applied to master's programs,
yes,
you
didn't go.
You didn't go because you wanted to stay. So with your husband.
Well, mainly what I wanted to do was work in industry because in college at USC, from day one, even before I had my first class, I was already employed at the engineering computer lab on campus and as an operator. I soon, after I took some programming classes, soon moved into becoming a systems programmer. I worked there all 4 years and that's how I paid for my room and board. Initially lived off campus with my roommate. I was 17, she was only 16. And we just latched onto each other because we were both young and naive and didn't know, had never been away from home before. And so we kind of took care of each other.
So you started college at 17?
I think I was 17 or 18. Yeah, something like that. I think I turned 18 in December of the year I started. So my birthday's at December 20th, at the end of the year. So I think I was, and she was 16. She graduated high school very early. And, but she had a car. She could drive. I did. I learned to drive, but didn't have a car. I rode my bicycle and walked everywhere. So I got to ride with her, and she taught me knitting. I already knew crochet, and she taught me knitting, and we were roommates. And so we went to the local Super Yarn Mart and bought yarn and made things all through college for ourselves. And even some people wanted us to make pillows and shawls and blankets for them. So we did.
So you mentioned your work as a systems programmer at the computer center. What machine was it?
Deck 10. Okay, USC was one of the earliest nodes on the ARPANET. When I started there in 1973, right after the summer, like September, they were just getting, like around that time, the IMP for the ARPANET. And James Weidel was the one who was in charge of it. And he said, all of you operators, all of you people here, you work on all the machines that are in this room except for this one. I am responsible for that one. No one touches it but me. And the reason I name him is because my roommate is Cecilia Henderson. And she ended up, after we graduated, marrying him. And unfortunately, he passed away, I believe, last year. But I'm still in touch with Shelley, and she's living in Southern California. And we worked together all through. We went to some of the same classes in college, and we helped each other out. And then we were a circle of friends. And while I was there, I met through Shelley's, at the time, boyfriend, Mike. He went to school with Mark Van Orden. They were best friends. And he was at USC, and Mark was at Cal State Northridge. But they would meet, they lived in La Crescenta, and they would meet once a week to play pool at the local bowling alley. So one day, it was right after Christmas, December 28th, I was staying with Shelley at her sister's place in Sunland, and Mike called up Shelley and said, we're supposed to go out on a date tonight. And she says, oh, well, Evelyn's here. And he says, well, bring her along. I didn't want to go. They made me go. And the reason was it was a setup. Mike and Shelley decided that Mark and I should meet. So we met, we walked in, Shelley and me, behind Mike, and shocked Mark because he wasn't expecting to see any young women, coming with Mike at that time. He had never brought anyone like that before. So Shelley and I walk in, and Mike introduces us, and he said, you have to understand, Shelley is short, and I'm tall. I was tall and thin, and Mark was looking at the two of us, and he told me afterwards, he said, I was secretly hoping that you were the one for me. Because I guess I was his type. We look like brother and sister, actually. And we just, from the moment we saw each other, that was it. It was love at first sight. And we played pool, and I was on Mark's team, and we won because my dad taught me how to play. But I don't remember anything about the game. All I remember is him. But he was very shy. And so I went back with Shelley, spent the night, and we were on the floor, in a sleeping bag, and I'm saying, tell Mike that I like Mark. So she did. And then, remember, that was December 28th. The movie Earthquake was released on January 1st at what was called the Grauman's Chinese Theater. They decided we would double date and go see it. So that's when we had our first fix-up date. And of course, he asked me for my phone number, and then the rest is history. We were engaged to be married within, I'd say, 6 to 9 months, but we planned, and this was in my sophomore year, middle of my sophomore year. And so we decided to get married, but after we graduated, and after Mark moved out of he waited till he graduated before he moved away from home and got his own apartment. And I already was on my own, but I wanted him to have that independence. Because what's the rush? We knew we were going to get married. It was just a formality. So that's what we did. And he would drive from La Crescenta every Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday to see me every weekend throughout our entire rest of our college years. I had no car, so he came to me.
It's a nice story. Let's see. So what was the first program you ever wrote?
First computer science class, Dr. Carlson, who was the one who kind of set up the undergraduate program. So very first class, walk in, Dr. Carlson is sitting on the desk, and he said to us, I'll never forget it. He looked at everyone and said, what do you want to learn in this class? This is like Computer Science 101. What do you want to learn? And everybody was poised with their notebooks and let's take notes, And he asked the question, and everyone was like, and it was an interesting class because a very large portion of our class were people from Iran. Before the Shah was deposed, they were there to learn computer science, women and men. And I'd say 40% of my class was women and 60% men. But then I don't remember what year it happened when the Shah was deposed. They all were sent home, and I never heard from them again. They just left the university and were gone. That was kind of a shocking event. But he asked us that, and people were thinking, and I don't remember what people said, but I thought, this is going to be great. And it was. And he became my advisor. And then I took my first and only artificial intelligence class. The professor the first thing he said to us, and this was, I think, the same semester as my very first semester at USC.
Oh, really? So this was your freshman year?
Freshman year.
Wow.
He said to the class, I don't give any A's. Only B is the highest grade I give. And I was shocked and worried because my scholarship depended on my grade point average. I had to keep up a certain grade point average, and I was really nervous. So I went to Dr. Carlson, and I said, what do I do? And he said, I said, that's not fair, is it? And he said, no one ever said that life would be fair. So I took that as a life lesson. So what I did is I made sure I got straight A's in all my other classes, and I got a B in his class. I got the highest grade, which was a B. And I had no problem keeping my scholarship throughout. But he taught me a very valuable life lesson by that. And also the first day, what do you want to learn? So
what was his name?
Dr. Carlson.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any other influencers at college?
Yes, the very first class I took at USC was a physics class. I walked into the lecture hall, and it was one of those where you walk downstairs and it was kind of round or that kind of thing where the professor was at the bottom of the well with the blackboards. No whiteboards then, it was still all chalkboards. And she didn't come in the room right away, but when I walked in, I would say it held about 100 people. And I walked in and everyone turned around and looked at me. And I thought, what did I do? What am I doing wrong? And then I sat down and people were still looking, and someone said, I think you're in the wrong place. And I said, is this Physics 101 or whatever it was called? Yeah. And they had a puzzled look on their face. Well, then the professor came in, and no one knew who the professor was going to be. It was a woman, physics professor. And then it dawned on me why, because they were like, shocked to see a woman there. And then I realized they were shocked to see me in the class. That was a strange experience that I never expected to have. I was too young. I didn't know what to expect. But then we had our, lab work to do in the physics class. And once people saw I knew what I was doing, they all asked me for help. So I won them over, I guess. Same in calculus class. When I was in high school, there were about 20 of us that wanted to learn calculus in high school. The same group, my friends. And they taught it to us. No one had ever asked before, but they taught it to us. So when I had to take my calculus classes 2 semesters at USC, I already knew it. I was doing my other homework in class and stuff. And I would get, of course, you can check your work in calculus, right? So I would do the test, check it, and get 100% every time. And people around me were like, can you please help me? Can you please? I'm having trouble. So I did, because I like to help people.
Let's see. Did you have any interesting summer jobs or internships?
Yes. I worked for Hughes Research Labs. I believe it was throughout my senior year at USC. I was referred by Dr. Carlson when they asked, do you have someone that would be a suitable intern? First person he recommended was me. So I did. I had to buy a car, learn to drive to Malibu from USC. So that was a trial by fire. I had learned to drive many years ago, but I was afraid of it. I had a phobia of it. So Mark helped me buy a used car, taught me how to drive it, and I drove to Malibu. And it was I was doing image processing research at Hughes Research Labs and watched the sunset over the ocean every evening. And I remember I would leave my classes and drive out there and go first thing to the vending machine and get 2 ice cream sandwiches because I'd be hungry. So that was like a luxury for me. But yes, it was groundbreaking. And I got to have my name in a paper that they wrote about scene analysis. So I vowed to try and get a permanent position there after I graduated, but they didn't have the funding for me right away. So I did a stint at Hughes Aircraft in Culver City working on the F-15 software, and I really hated that. But it was 9 months stint there, did some, that work, and then transferred over to Hughes Research Labs. And my father was working at Hughes El Segundo at the time. And I didn't get the job because of him, but it was just, I knew of the company and I knew what the work that they were doing through him. But he was working in the space division in the high-rise building, and he was a computer operator, but he was also doing some programming for them. He'd fix bugs for them and stuff. Never probably got paid or got credit for it, but he just had a knack. And that's where I got it from, I'm sure. He taught me my ABCs and my 1, 2, 3s, and I didn't get to go to kindergarten because I already knew the stuff. And I'm still angry to this day because you know why? They have lots of crafts in kindergarten, and I always loved craft. My brother would come home with his string paintings and his egg crate projects, and I was so jealous.
So what year did you graduate?
Well, I also had another job at USC.
Oh, okay.
And I was still working 20 hours a week at the computer lab throughout the entire time. So when I worked at Hughes Research Labs, I was working 20 hours a week there, plus I was taking a full 16 units of classes. So I was busy. But it was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I also was asked by the same physics professor that I had in my freshman year. She was given some tapes with imagery from the Voyager missions and needed them downloaded and checked. And she hired me to do that. Part-time, just paid me a little bit. And I would have done it for free because I was so excited to be able to work for JPL indirectly. I didn't get to go down there and visit it, but I did the work and got to see the imagery. And then she gifted me at the end of that process some beautiful 9 prints of the imagery Saturn and some of the other, beautiful images that I framed and put up later on my office wall. And I posted a picture of my home office where we live now, in the house we live now, with those pictures on the wall that I had received right before I graduated from USC. So I did get to work for JPL, and I did put it in my LinkedIn profile, and that has led to me getting some of the most interesting connections and learning about inside stuff about the space program. I have always been interested in it, and I had originally planned to work in the space program. But the reason I didn't pursue that career, I was too nervous about having bugs in my software and causing a mission to crash or something wrong. And that just was too nerve-wracking to me. I didn't want to do that. When I worked at Hughes Research Labs, I had to leave there. And the reason is I had top secret security clearance, and the work I was doing was scene analysis for kill assessment, bomb assessment. And I knew that the work I was doing would apply to medical research. They could diagnose black lung disease from X-rays using our technology. But my boss told me in my second performance review, where he gave me the maximum raise possible and wanted to keep me there, and he said, I asked him, can I work on medical imaging instead? And he said, no, there's no money in that. NIH doesn't have funds for that right now. And that's when I gave him my resignation, because I had already gotten my job at Xerox. And he was crying. I said, and I was also driving to Malibu from La Crescenta area, which was a nightmare commute. But the main reason was morality. When I interviewed, there's a story even how I got the job at Xerox, if you want to hear that story.
Sure, but before we get to that,
okay,
was there also like a summer job at Bell Labs?
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, in between my junior year and my senior year, I went to Bell Labs in Naperville, Illinois, for a summer internship. And that was my first time being on a plane, first time away from home by myself. I had a wonderful roommate whose family lived in Madison, Wisconsin. And on the weekends, I would ride with her in her little Volkswagen Beetle to Madison and spend the weekends there. And it was her family really liked me, and I stayed with her and her family. And that was just a wonderful experience. But Mark and I were already engaged to be married. And I was away for a summer, six weeks, I think it was. And everybody was joking that, oh, you're going to break up. You're going to be far apart. You're not going to, You're not going to get married after that, are you? We wrote each other letters every single day, and we were also writing a lot of poetry and things. We like to write, and I did a lot of drawings and things that I would send. We would send things back and forth. We have every single one of those letters, every bit of it that was sent back and forth, and it just made us closer. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. So yes, between junior and senior year, and it was a wonderful experience. I had a wonderful supervisor, and it was the first time away from home on my own, and I really learned a lot from that experience, not just being a programmer, but also being away from home and having the feeling of independence and starting my adult life.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about your first job at Hughes. So that was, what years was that?
Okay, I graduated in '77 from USC. So I started at Hughes Aircraft in 1977, and I think I was only there about 9 months. So that would be in '78, early '78, that I moved over to Hughes Research Labs in Malibu. And then I resigned from there in March of 1979. And I started in March of '79 at Xerox Special Information Systems. At that time, it was called Xerox Electro-Optical Systems in the Publishing Systems Department, because I thought that would be safe, that I wouldn't have to have my security clearance anymore. Publishing, you don't need a clearance for that. I interviewed there, got the job immediately, and the way I heard about the position, Mark and I went to the local computer shop. I think it was called the Byte Shop in Pasadena. And we bought an Apple II with money we had left over from our honeymoon. And we bought that Apple II, and it was the most exciting experience to be able to carry out a computer in one hand. Mark was carrying it in one hand under his arm and opening the door for me with his other. And I'm going, this is amazing. We brought that computer home, and we opened it up, set it up, and wrote our first program in Steve Woz's wonderful BASIC. Never forget it, Mark and I. That's the only time we ever programmed together, was that one experience. And well, I have a story about Woz later on, too, that I can tell you. And I didn't finish on that. The reason I'm bringing that up is at the Byte Shop was someone who worked at XEOS, Xerox Electro-Optical System. And he says, what do you do for a living? And I told him, and I said, I'm looking for a job. And he said, oh, we're hiring. So he referred me to Chuck Haynes, who called me for an interview, interviewed me, and hired me very quickly. And that's how I ended up in the Publishing Systems Department. And my first tasks were to maintain and update the font creation software. There was a wonderful font designer that worked in El Segundo, but would spend time in Pasadena, where I worked, working with me, and I watched him design fonts, hand tune. Every single font had to be at 72 DPI and at 300 DPI. 72 for the Alto, 300 for the laser printers. And he would scan drawings of these fonts that he designed, but then he would hand tune every single bit and every single character and every single font and every single version. And the software that I maintained is the software he used to do that fine tuning. And he showed me his art. He showed me how he does it and how it is an art, because, turning a pixel on or off can make all the difference in how something looks. And he was a master at it. So that was interesting. I learned a lot about publishing. I learned a lot about laser printing.
What was the software called?
I don't know. It was a font application, a font generation application. I don't remember what it was called.
What did it run on?
The Alto.
Okay.
I used the Alto from day one at XEOS doing that work. And I didn't have an Alto in my office at that time. It was in the Alto lab, where there was a room that was darkened, and each Alto, as you've seen, would have a lamp next to it. And there were maybe 5 around the room. So you would come in when you needed to use an Alto and use it. And usually there was one available. You didn't have to really reserve time for it. They had enough. But eventually we all ended up with them in our office, in our personal offices. So that's what I did first, was the font generation software. Another thing I did was when Charles Simonyi left Xerox PARC to go work for Bill Gates to develop Microsoft Word. What he did at Xerox before that was create Bravo, desktop publishing system. So when he left, and he would come visit XEOS, and I got to know him, I was the one designated to maintain Bravo for Xerox for a while. So that was one of my tasks on the Alto. But then I started in March 79. It was in December 20th, my birthday, that Alan Paith, a co-worker, demonstrated Smalltalk 76 on the Alto to me, personal demo. He says, you have to see this. And when I saw it, my dream came true, because from day one, back in high school, I wanted to make computers easy for people to use and to program, anyone, without having to go all through a computer science degree and programming classes and all of that. Because I could see in the future that would be possible. But when I saw Smalltalk 76, and he showed me how you could change things and just on the fly and just keep going, I said, this is it. This is what, I knew Xerox was a good place, and I had heard about the Alto. But when I saw Smalltalk, that's when my life changed. Just in that second.
And so what was it about Smalltalk that was so...
It was so intuitive. The object-oriented nature, classes and methods, the compact nature of the software, the fact that you could change it and just keep running without compiling and going through all that overhead, and testing became easy. You didn't have to worry about crashing everything, because it just worked. If some little part would crash, and you'd move on. And in fact, I was so interested in it that Alan and I said, we have to create an app in this. And we're going to do we called it PubEditor, Publication Editor. This was before the term desktop publishing had even been coined. No one had that term yet. So we called it PubEditor. It was short for Publication Editor, because we wanted to be able to have like magazine pages, not just, we already had Bravo, and we had other, just word processing. You couldn't really put pictures in there easily. You couldn't have multiple stories on a page with pictures and continued on other pages. So we wanted to create that. So Alan and I worked on that, a prototype called PubEditor, for many months. And then we even wrote a functional spec for it to get funding to continue development of it. That's when I started giving demos. It was enough of a prototype. And when management saw what we had, anytime someone came to visit who possibly was looking for a software contract work with our department, I would be designated as the one to give the PubEditor demo. And they would come through. Sometimes they'd be getting the dog, we call it the dog and pony show, where they get to see the hardware, the laser printers, the fonts, but they always brought them to where I was in the Alto lab. And they'd say, oh, can you please give these people a PubEditor demo? Oh, yes, I would love to. That's how I learned to give demos. The first time I gave a demo, something crashed. And I said, oh, crap, my first demo, and I've already messed up. Well, then it dawned on me, so what? It's Smalltalk. You just keep going. And then I mentioned that to them. They said, what? I said, well, it crashed, but I'm just going to move on. And that was the highlight of the demo. That's what got people's attention. And of course, that became a standard part of my demo from then on. And the New York Times came through. We got a contract to do a prototype for them. And I got to visit New York and see where the newspapers are printed and stuff. That was quite an interesting experience. Then we got a contract with our Donnelly book publisher, and they were using the PubEditor prototype. I don't remember exactly what they did. It was a short-term contract. But the key demos were to a series of people that came through from the federal government. I didn't know who they were. I just knew that they were big shots, and because top management was escorting them through the building and came to my station. So I thought, okay, I better, do a good job with this one. And then they kept coming back and meeting and wanting more demos. So I knew something was up, but then I found out that they were from, we would call them the spooks. They wouldn't say what government agency they were from, but we know now it's the NSA and the CIA. And some of them were military in full dress, and some of them were the civilians who worked in those organizations, which I found out later on. But what came from that? Long-term, I'd say at least 10-year worth of contracts to develop something called the Analyst, which was a comprehensive information management system in Smalltalk, based on the PubEditor demo and the other demos that we had given them. They wanted this developed, and so the department I worked in, all the people were designated to work on that, and they hired some additional people. In the meantime, PubEditor was in Smalltalk 76. But by the time we got the contracts, I don't remember the year that we started getting the contracts, but I know Smalltalk 80 had been issued. And so I learned Smalltalk 80 and transferred, the implementation there, got to know it inside and out because I knew that they would be developing applications in it. So I'd better get to know it. I didn't try to port PubEditor or anything like that because this was a different thing. It was an information management. They weren't into that. The PubEditor kind of technology would just be one small part of this giant application, comprehensive application. So I knew that we needed a stable Smalltalk 80 platform for them to develop their applications. They all had security clearances. I had given up my clearances, and as a condition of my employment, I said, I will never get a clearance again because one of the reasons I left my job is I don't want to do that kind of work. I said, okay, no problem. So they honored that. So I decided my role would be to provide this stable Smalltalk 80 platform, learn everything I could about it, make sure that I could answer any questions and help them get up to speed on developing the application. So by then, that time, I don't remember the timing of whether we were still using the Alto or whether we switched over to the Dolphins, the Xerox, which then later became the Xerox 1100s. I think people were using the Dolphin workstations by then, and I think initially these government people had gotten a few Altos installed in their offices, but that was kind of a temporary thing. It wasn't really a commercial product. So they had a few for demo purposes probably, and then when the Dolphin workstations became available, then they purchased those as part of the contract work, and all of the major work for that was done on the Dolphin 1100, that later called the 1100, and then I think they eventually ended up with some Dorados, which was a Xerox 1132. So I would come up to Park about a week, a month for a while to transfer the technology, to learn everything I could, to ask questions and be able to then teach other people and transfer it down and fix bugs and make it stable and robust. And so in that process, I said, well, it can be a commercial product. Why not? The government wanted it to be commercial so that it would be supported by Xerox. And so that I begged my management to allow me to create a commercial product, not knowing even what that meant, but knowing that it needed to get out there into the world, that other people needed to be able to buy it, see it, learn it, use it. And that would help the government. So everybody wins. So my management said to me, we'll let you transfer that and work on it full time under one condition, that you bring in enough revenue to pay your salary and benefits, which at that time were, say, maybe $60,000 a year. So this was about the 1982-83 time frame. By 1983, I had the Smalltalk 80 commercial version 3, CV3 we called it, was a beta test version, and I had customers who bought it and helped me beta test it. And the very first customer was Tom Love of Schlumberger, and he was my #1 beta tester. He was in Connecticut, and he would call me 9 o'clock in the morning his time, which was, of course, 6 a.m. my time. And I loved getting into work early anyway. I'm a morning person, so we would talk first thing in the morning whenever he needed help. So he and others helped to helped me to engineer the hell out of that virtual image, the classes and methods. There isn't a single thing in that version that I didn't touch. I made everything consistent, commented the same way, variables named, methods, class, whatever, everything consistent and tested. And Tom Love was really, gave it a workout with, and he was working with Brad Cox at the time, because they wanted to develop their own object-oriented programming system. And out of that came Objective-C. That's what they developed. So what they learned from Smalltalk, and they wanted it to do one that was a little bit different for different requirements, to satisfy different requirements. And so Tom Love primarily understood, probably as well as I did, that implementation, the virtual image. And then I had to understand the virtual machine, because the applications needed to be platform independent. And the first commercial versions that I sold were for the Dolphin and Dorado, which the workstations were called the Xerox 1100 and the Xerox 1132. And the 1100 was about $50,000 or $55,000 workstation, retail, single unit, and the Dorado was more in the range of $100,000 per unit, and it was 10 times faster, roughly. And I never used the Dorado directly. The reason is it was 10 times faster. Once you use a Dorado, you get Dorado shock, and you can't go back to using a Dolphin. That's slower. So I watched people use it. We didn't really use it at XSIS too much. By that time, we were called Xerox Special Information Systems. Changed the name because they sold off the electro-optical portion. And if you want to know the dates on that, I can, I'm sure you can find that out. I don't remember off the top of my head. But we were by then XSIS. Xerox, yeah.
So the electrical optical was because of...
There were two parts to XEOS. There were two buildings. The EOS part, the electro-optical part, was hardware and very, groundbreaking optics for equipment, for technical equipment. I never understood it. It was in another building. L'Oreal came along, the company, and bought the EOS part and called it L'Oreal Electro-Optical Systems, and they stayed in that other building. I was in the engineering building, the government contract house engineering building. And both buildings, I believe, were leased. And so Xerox did not own those buildings. They leased both of them.
So the EOS part was like they were making optical equipment for what industry?
It might have been space program. It might have been industrial equipment that required very, very precision optics. And they were pioneers in the field, many, many patents. I never really learned much about it, but it was fascinating to me. I never really even got a tour over there. It was kind of locked down. If you didn't have business over there, you didn't go over there.
Right, okay. So that was more of a product business,
yes.
Whereas your side of the department was more of a service or contract.
Well, it was, but we also sold office systems to the government, mainly federal government. It was a government contract house, and so we would supply. The marketing department would supply the Xerox hardware in the terms of workstations, printers, copiers, service contracts as part of a contract where the part of the contract could also be software work. It could be a comprehensive or it could be a small one. I never knew the details of it because I didn't have the need to know because the clients all had clearances and it was top secret. I never asked questions.
Yeah. So it was offering a total solution.
Yes, they were offering, perfect way to put it. They were offering Xerox solutions primarily to military and government, Washington, D.C. mostly, and also Colorado. There was some work in Colorado Springs, I believe, because I visited there on a business trip once. That's where I was born near there, and so I wanted to go on that business trip just to kind of see the area where I was born. Because I was born in Aurora, which is a suburb of where my dad was stationed when he was in the Marines.
So XSIS stands for?
Xerox Special Information Systems.
And so that name change occurred?
When EOS portion was sold to L'Oreal, they changed the name, rebranded, or whatever you want to call it, Xerox Special Information Systems, XSIS. in Pasadena.
Yeah. And what year was that?
I don't remember. It wasn't important to me. It just only thing it did is we got new business cards that had the new name. That was I'm sure I have it in my archives.
Yeah. Okay.
I have all the business cards, and I can see what year they're from.
So you mentioned that the Smalltalk 80 was on Dolphin and Dorado workstations that the government bought. Did you ever work with the 1186 workstation?
Yeah, the Star. Yes, I did. And in fact, and I want to back up one step. Remember I said they let me work on Smalltalk if I could bring in enough revenue to pay for my salary and benefits. Within 2 years, I sold $20 million worth of workstations and software. And all the workstations came bundled with Interlisp D. That was part of it. They were called scientific engineering workstations or something like that, with Interlisp D. Almost every single customer paid an extra $5,000 to get Smalltalk 80. They weren't buying it for the Interlisp. They were buying it for Smalltalk. Some of them wanted both, and they were using both, but mostly it was Smalltalk. And I don't think my management ever understood that, and I don't think they ever credited me with that because, there were people who would deliver the workstations. They were responsible they were manufactured in El Segundo, Xerox El Segundo, and then they would make sure they got delivered to where they were supposed to go. And I made sure through my helper, Laura, that the software, which ran on the Xerox workstations, it ran on, I believe, Apollo, Deck 10, Tektronix was a big customer. We sold a lot of, and I believe they were $5,000 a copy for the workstations. But we also sold it on the IBM PC later on and the Apple Lisa and Macintosh, Mac 2. Yeah. So I sold in 83, we were selling primarily on the workstations. Xerox and Tektronix were the primary ones, and I think Apollo here and there. And then Sun, of course, workstations. That was very important because later on, that was very important. 83, it was primarily the workstations, and then in 84, when we had this customer version 4, which was the very robust final customer version, the very stable platform that was used for analysts and the other applications that came later. So then we also had the IBM PC version and the Lisa, which I bought a Lisa under the APTA, the Apple Programmers. I forget what it stands for, but it was for developers. And you got a 25% discount on the hardware. So my husband and I bought a Lisa for $7,500 because the retail was $7,495. We still have the information in our spreadsheets. The date we bought it, the date we ordered it versus the date we took delivery. I think we ordered it in December and got it in January of the next year. We were one of the earliest people to get one of the Lisas, I believe. And because, we were selling the Smalltalk for it. And had a good working relationship with people because a lot of the people working at Apple at that time were from Park. They worked in the Smalltalk group at Park. So they left and went to Apple. Some of the same people who gave the infamous Steve Jobs demo in 1979, which occurred the year I started working at Xerox. Yeah. Fun stories.
So, talk a little bit more about the work that you needed to do to convert Smalltalk 80 into a product. Yeah, because it had just been a research.
It was a mess. All I can say is it was great research version. It was nowhere near robust enough to be commercial. I don't think anyone understood that but me. Because no one looked at it in that way but me. And that's why I volunteered to do it, because I could see what needed to be done. I wanted it to be done. I couldn't wait to work on that. And plus, I love visiting Park. You know, when you're working in a government contract house with, you know, those old metal workstations, and they did give us the lamps and things to go with the Altos and then with the workstations. But still, we were a government issue, you know, same kind of furniture you'd see if you went back to Washington, D.C. and visited someone working there, you know. At Park, of course, I'm sure a lot of people know about the beanbag chairs and about the open areas and the wonderful cafeteria and the wonderful view and just on in the lawn. And it's a beautiful setting, and I just couldn't wait to go visit. And that was the first time I'd ever really done business traveling. And once my boss, Chuck Haynes, took me the first time to show me the ropes of travel and for Xerox and where to stay and what to do. And then I was very happy to go on my own from then on, and that was fun.
Yeah. But talk about what actually
what I did.
Yeah.
What I had to
you
do.
said you knew what you needed to do. What was it?
Okay. Everything was kind of kludgy. It wasn't clean. It wasn't engineered. It was a research version. And I can't remember details right now because I literally haven't touched any software since 1990. So I haven't been a coder, a programmer, a software engineer since then. But from what I remember, it was very messy. And Glenn Krasner was the person, my go-to person, to exchange versions. So I would get the latest version that they had at Park that they were using. And I would take it home and I would fix bugs, find bugs, fix bugs. And we would find them at XSS because, the people were doing the applications. And so they would report the bugs to me and say, well, can you fix this, or can you add that, or can you do this? So I would do it, the work, as quickly as I could and send it back to Glenn and have him review it. And then he would give it to the others who would use it. And then they would give him feedback. Oh, this is great, or oh, you missed something, and so we went back and forth over and over and over again on that, and until we got it bulletproof. And then it was, when it was officially released in 1983, Smalltalk 80 CV3 is what I called it as a commercial CV means commercial version. It's what I designated it. That was April 24th. 1983 was the Smalltalk 80 launch event at Park, where they had a hot air balloon on the lawn. They had a big cake with the Smalltalk balloon from the 1981 Byte magazine cover on the cake. And I have photos that I've posted online from my own camera of me at the event with the people from I think it might have still been called Learning Research Group, LRG, was the Smalltalk group. And then it got changed, its name, to Systems Concepts Lab at some point. I don't remember what year that occurred, but same group, just different name. And around that time of the launch is when Alan Kay was leaving the group. I think when Adele Goldberg took over managing the group after Alan Kay left, I think that's when the name changed to Systems Concepts Labs. I'm not sure about that. Right. But I worked with Adele. She asked me to write a chapter for her book, which is called The Orange Book, Smalltalk 80. Now the name escapes me. The interactive Smalltalk 80, the interactive programming environment, known as the Orange Book. And the blue book was Smalltalk 80, the interactive programming. No, did I just say that? Oh, I'm. Do you remember what the blue book is called? I'm just having a memory
but
lapse.
I have it in my office. We can look it up. One of them is like the system, right?
One is interactive programming, right, and the language and its implementation. The blue book is Smalltalk 80, the language and its implementation. The Orange Book, the Blue Book authors are Adele Goldberg and David Robson. They worked together on that. And that was at the same time, Adele wrote the Orange Book, which is the interactive programming environment, Smalltalk 80, the interactive programming environment. And the reason they're called the Blue Book and the Orange Book is because the covers were similar, but had a bright blue on one cover and a bright orange on the other cover. And then subsequently there was a green book and a purple book after that. But Adele asked me to write an appendix in the orange book. And it was about 3 pages in the book. And it was called Smalltalk 80 Software Development Do's and Don'ts. So it was a list of do this, don't do that. And the very last thing was do have fun. And that was a wonderful opportunity. So from that moment, I was actually, only the second time in my career, published author. The first time was a paper I had contributed to at Hughes Research Labs on scene analysis. Oh, and I wanted to mention, at that event, the launch event, Adele Goldberg and David Robson were signing autographs on those books that were just been published. And there's, in the pictures that I have, it shows them signing books. And I have all those books autographed, of course, in my collection, which are my treasures. And I have other copies, which aren't autographed, but some were mine, extra copies, and some were given to me recently by people who had them and knew that I would treasure them. And I have more copies now.
So then, so it sounds like the commercial version of Smalltalk 80 that you worked on, whatever changes you made, Park would reaccept them back into their version?
Yes, and they would distribute it amongst the group, and they would just adopt the new version. Glenn would announce, and Steve Putz, I think he was also involved with, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think Glenn and Steve were the two people who would kind of tell everyone, okay, so we've made changes, or Evelyn's made changes, or whatever I don't know what they told them. But they said, we're going to start using this version from now on. So don't, integrate your stuff, your changes, your app, whatever you're working on, let's put it in the new version, and then we can further test out that newer version. Okay. And then he would give me feedback, and it would go around continuously until we were ready to release. We had a version bulletproof enough and satisfactory enough that we deemed it ready for commercial sale.
Okay, so it was Glenn and Steve Putz who were the maintainers of the version.
I'm not absolutely sure about Steve Putz, but I know Glenn Krasner was my main contact. And we worked very well together.
So how was version control actually done in Smalltalk?
I don't remember.
Because it's not like, today we have like GitHub.
Well, it's a virtual image.
Yeah.
You would issue a new virtual image. And then you could always download your pieces, your classes and methods, and then you could file them in to the new virtual image. Right. Upload them, however you want to call it. I don't remember the details of that.
But how would changes between different contributors be sort of merged or synchronized?
I don't know, because I did not do that.
Okay.
If you're talking about application level stuff, built on top of the basic virtual image, because we were doing virtual image work, basic classes and methods that were standardized across all platforms. Right. Then other people would have their own applications. And in XSIS, we had Analyst and others later on, the Analyst spreadsheet package, the world map, and later on the Humble Expert System shell. And then you could just take that pieces, your classes and methods, and file them out, and then you could file them into the new version, and there could be some problems, and you might have to change names of things or do something a little different. And there would be notes about what changes had been made, I believe. So, this class changed, that class. I believe there was some documentation about what had changed, and so people would look at that and say, oh, well, I'm not using those classes, or I'm not using that, so I don't have to worry about it. I'll just try it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, Glenn, Steve, whoever, help. Or me, at XSIS, they'd ask me for help. And we would work on it together and solve whatever problem.
So, but how would they make sure that, say, if you were working on a class, that somebody at Park wasn't also simultaneously working on the class?
Because Glenn and I made that agreement.
Okay. So was there some mechanism?
It would all go through Glenn at Park, and it would all go through me at XSIS, and Glenn and I talked daily basis if we needed to.
Okay.
We coordinated.
Okay.
We were very good at coordinating. And we would respect each other. Oh, I'm working on this now. Can you hold off for a little while?
Okay.
Don't make any changes. You tell people to back off and give them an estimate on how long.
So it was all organizational. There was no technical thing preventing somebody from clobbering your changes. It was just that you had a system, organizational system.
Yeah, there were certain things. Oh, well, people were free to change anything they want, but then they would have to suffer the consequences because they could no longer get support from people like me if they changed things that we considered part of the basic system, the virtual image. You do it at your own peril. And that was in the books. Be careful what you change. You can change anything. Right. But do you really want to change one of the important system classes? I think they were called system classes. Yeah. If you want to change those, you do it at your own peril. And it won't end up in the standard version unless you coordinate that with the people who are in charge of the standard version, which is Glenn and me. At the time of the commercial stuff.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then you mentioned that this commercial version was shipped on, other third-party workstations like Tektronix, Apollo.
I think Apollo was like a very short time because I think they were out of business or something. It wasn't an important one. The important one was Sun. Tektronix that were non-Xerox workstations, and also then the IBM PC and the Apple Mac II and Lisa. But those systems were kind of underpowered and didn't have enough memory and didn't have enough resources to really run it well. I couldn't really use Smalltalk at home. I had it at home on the Lisa. But I didn't really use it. It was too slow, and there was too much memory swapping and all that. It didn't work. Those weren't powerful enough to support all the overhead you need in Smalltalk. My husband ended up using the Lisa for his business. It was a wonderful system to run his business, and he loved it and used it for many, many years. So our money was not wasted in buying this $7,500 computer. I dabbled with it a little, but he used it at his business.
So your work was all on the Smalltalk implementation of the virtual machine?
The virtual image.
The virtual image.
The image is platform independent. It ran the same. It was the same classes, same methods, same structure on all of the systems. Small, medium, large workstations, PCs, always the same. Now, you had to have some maybe minor modifications to make it work on a particular platform, but nothing major. Now, the virtual machine is what made it operate properly on an individual machine. Oh. So you had, in the case of the workstations, the Xerox workstation, microcode. And before we were releasing CV3, Smalltalk 80 CV3 on the Dolphin, which was called the Xerox 1100, we found a bug in the microcode. And Kim McCall spent a week at XSIS. He was in the Smalltalk group at Park. He spent a week with me at XSIS debugging, and we didn't finish, so then I went up there the next week, and we spent another week, or vice versa. I don't remember the sequence. Now, I had never programmed in microcode. He taught me enough, and I was always a good detective and a good debugger. So I would ask questions like, have you thought about it this? Have you tried that? And he'd say, that doesn't make sense. And other times he said, no, I didn't think of that. Let's try it. And I was learning, as we were going. Turned out there was a timing issue in the microcode. And so what we had, he did this. Kim had to write debugging code. Then you have to debug the debugging code. And then, once you do all that, then you run it, and he suspected a timing issue and was able to determine yes, and correct it and talk to whoever you talk to about microcode. Hardware guys, I don't even know. But he reported it to them, and they fixed whatever they had to fix, because it was an issue in the machine. And it wasn't just a Smalltalk problem. It was a problem for the workstation. So we fixed it in time. And the next week we shipped.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was on the Dolphin?
This Dolphin.
Okay.
I never really did any work on the Dorado. I watched people use it. I never used it myself other than once or twice and go, I can't do that. I'll never want to go back to the slow Dolphin.
Yeah. So the virtual machine was the hardware specific portion.
Yes.
But the virtual image was the same across all the different hardware.
Yes, as close as you could be. Like there's different fonts and for the different ones. I'm sure that they had to, make some changes, but it was a standard change that you just make every time there was a new version. And I didn't get involved in that aspect of it. I didn't have to. I was just worried about the virtual image that was the same for the Dolphin and the Dorado. And I did that initially for this in 1983 for the CV3 version and in 1984 for the CV4 version. Pretty bulletproof. Don't think it needed any changes for a long time after that. But then later on, people were using Sun workstations. And when Park Place Systems spun off, it was all Sun-based. And the federal government that we did the contracts for, it was on the Sun workstations eventually. And you mentioned the 1186, the Star workstation. Yes, I was responsible for selling that version also. And it was pretty much the same version that also ran on the Dolphin and the Dorado. And I even learned to install the Star workstations in people's offices. And I have a screwdriver that's all you needed to, I think you had to turn a screw that was locking down the disk drive and a couple of simple things, and then you were set up to run the Star workstation. So I would test things on the Star. I think I had one in my office along with the Dolphin for a while. Yeah, and I was supporting that, but I never had a Dorado.
Okay. Yeah, so the 1186, I believe, was based on the 6085, which was the second version of the Star, I think. The later version?
I think so. I never really was that familiar with it. We didn't.
It was also sold as a Lisp workstation, also, right?
The
1186.
Probably. Yeah. Sure. Why not? I mean, it ran the same stuff as the Dolphin and Dorado. So yeah, right. Yeah. But that was the Xerox's primary office workstation. That was it was still too expensive. It was still not the right mix of features for the marketplace, and it wasn't that successful. Yeah. It's like Lisa was early, but it was a good office workstation. But my big complaint was a one-button mouse. Can't do it. I love pop-up menus. You have 3-button mouse or a 2-button mouse, you can do pop-up menus. In other words, you move the mouse and you just push a button. And the menus pop up no matter where their mouse is on the screen. And it's context sensitive. So if you're in a certain type of window, the menu for that window would come up. So if it's graphics, it's a graphics menu. And if it's text, it's a text editing menu. But in the Lisa, when I got that, I go, this one button, pull down. You got to move the mouse to the top, pull down the menu, and then go back to where you were. Then you got to go back up. And I was going nuts over that. And I thought they missed one of the most important user interface things. Now, people who learned with pull-down menus, that's fine for them. That's what they learned. But I learned with pop-up. And I never wanted to switch. It's just because I just found it so inconvenient. It just bugged me.
So going back to the image, so everything in the image was the system classes, right? So that was what you worked on, was just the system classes in Smalltalk itself.
Yes.
Right? So okay.
And those are defined in the blue book. Mm-hmm. And then the orange book also discusses them. Right. But the blue book, which is the language and its implementation, talks about the system classes. The orange book tells you how to develop an application using those systems classes and adding on, to the image with your own application code. Right. So that was the difference between the two books.
Right. Okay. And so you were basically working in the blue book area. You were right, you were modifying the system, the code for the actual system classes.
For Smalltalk 80, yes. For Smalltalk 76, I was an application prototype developer. So I worked, in the application side for the prototype.
Because that was on the PubEditor was on.
PubEditor was a
Yeah.
prototype. Smalltalk 76 was never a commercial product.
So so you never did any work on any of the applications that like Analyst or any of those that
No.
XSIS.
No, but I worked closely with the group that did. Kurt Pearsall was the person I worked closest with. And you met him recently. He's now at Apple. Kurt helped me a lot with the marketing of the commercial version of Smalltalk 80 on the Xerox workstations primarily, because he was doing the analyst work, very actively involved in that. But I needed someone who was an application developer for the government. They wanted the stable platform. So needed somebody to help me with the marketing. And marketing involves giving talks at OOPSLA. And I helped organize the OOPSLA conference, the Object-Oriented Programming Systems, Languages, and Applications conference. First one was in 1986. And Adele Goldberg invited me to be on the planning committee for that conference. And the planning started in 1985, and there were about 27 people on the planning committee, mostly in academia, research, and things like that. Very few people in the commercial side. But there were two of us. There was Chet Wazinski from IBM Marketing, and there was me, who was, at the time, marketing Smalltalk 80 for the Xerox workstations and the other workstations. And what we proposed for OOPSLA was tutorial section. Now, at the time, Adele Goldberg was president of ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, that was sponsoring the conference under SIGPLAN, Special Interest Group for Programming Languages. So she was president, so she said, we need an object-oriented programming conference, international. There had never been an international OOP conference. So, and she invited me, and I was very honored to be invited to participate on the planning committee. We proposed at one of the meetings to have the tutorials. I did. I said, we have to teach people. And most of the people around the room said, why? We all know how to use this stuff. Why do we need tutorials? And being product-minded and thinking about marketing and being a teacher at heart, I was stunned by that, but I said, don't worry. I will volunteer to organize that section, and I work for Xerox, and I have resources at my disposal to make it happen. And I know a lot of people through my marketing. I know people in the industry, and I will invite them to give tutorials. So, Chet Wazinski at IBM. The first conference was held at the Portland Marriott. So it was in Portland. Now, the conference, I don't think that they had booked all the rooms. They didn't need all of the whole facility, the conference facility yet for that conference. But once we added a whole tutorial day with 13 different presentations, different tracks in one day, then Chet said, we're going to need every room they got at the Marriott. So he went there to negotiate. And they said, this is a first-year conference. It's not going to make money. It's not going to be profitable. How do we know you can guarantee that you're going to pay the bill, fill the rooms, et cetera, use our entire facility? And he said, well, I'm from IBM. I'll guarantee. So here I am from Xerox guaranteeing that I can get all the tutorials together. And he's from IBM saying, don't worry, I'll make sure that you get paid. And so the conference committee agreed. And so there we were off and running. And there were 13 speakers, 11 tutorials in a morning session and afternoon session with 2 tracks. I think the morning session was 1 track and the afternoon was 2. And lunch in between, and it sold out. And it made that first year conference profitable for ACM. And they weren't expecting it to be profitable, but it was the tutorials. And every year after that, I did 2 more years organizing it. And the first year, I created the binder. And I went to a copier and copied the pages, printed it in master and copied the pages and put the tabs and did the art, had the art department do the cover artwork with the Smalltalk balloon drawing on it. And we created enough for everyone at the conference, and I had them shipped. And I didn't need a budget for that because I get to stand at the copier for free and use however much paper and toner I need. So I did that. And the art department, they just did it. We had access to it, and they created the tabs and did nice, yeah. So that binder, and you know this, Hansen, every tutorial in there, the copyright was owned by the speaker's organization that they came from. We made it that way so that they could use their presentation for their own marketing or their own research, and not have to get permission from ACM. But that is also the reason that the tutorial notebook, all of those tutorials never was recorded by the ACM. It never went into their archives. So it does not exist online anywhere, none of those presentations. And I kept one binder, and I copied all the pages at home on my computer and gave you the original for the museum's permanent collection. I only found one other copy when I did some, questions on LinkedIn. I said, anybody out there have this? And I put a picture of the cover and described it. And one person, I believe he might have been in the Netherlands, had one. That's all I could find. So I would love to be able to publish that, but it would be a very complicated process to figure that out with the copyrights and all.
So when I talked to Tom Love, he actually said that he had been involved in helping to start the original OOPSLA.
He was in the planning committee, yes. And I've posted on LinkedIn the names of all the people that were on the planning committee. So connect and look at one of my featured posts, and it's there. It's there. And I took pictures of the conference program and the list of the program committee and some things, and they're posted.
Yeah, because I think he gave us a napkin with the signatures of all the planners. Yes.
That's a treasure. That's a wonderful treasure. Is my name on there? Did I sign it? Because I wasn't at every single meeting. I might not have been at the original meetings. I was invited a little bit later, so I don't think I was. No, I wasn't in that meeting. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and you've kept up a relationship with Tom over the years.
Yes, we every few years. Well, what happened? Okay, I left Xerox in 1992. It wasn't my idea to leave, and I'll tell the story later. But I retired from software engineering. I retired from Xerox, from software engineering, and I didn't even look around to see what happened to Smalltalk for 20 years. I left Xerox on Valentine's Day of 1992. So on Valentine's Day of 2012, I decided to see if Smalltalk was still around. And I found out that it was. And that's a lot of the people that I had worked with back in the 1980s were still working with Smalltalk or whatever it was called. There are different names for it nowadays around the world. But it was alive and well. And so then I wanted to connect with people and see what they were doing, and realized that that year, or 2013, would be the 30th anniversary of the release of commercial Smalltalk. Gary Keeg, I met in 1983, I believe, while I was at Xerox. He was sent by his management in Germany to come to our offices and learn about Smalltalk. He didn't really want to learn it. He didn't know what it was, but he came, and he spent a week, and I taught him Smalltalk.
What company did he work for?
I don't know what company he was working for. All I know is that when he went home, I don't know how long it was, but he resigned from that company and started his own Smalltalk company. He didn't want to learn it, and once he learned it, he wanted to start his own company. And so his company, Gary Keeg, with his name, as the name of the company, still existed in 2012. 2012. Or maybe it was 2013. And so I contacted him, and he said, oh, I have a Smalltalk conference for 8 years. I've had it every year in the United States. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And I said, but it's the 30th anniversary. When and where is the conference going to be? And he said, it'll be in Phoenix. And I said, can we have a reunion event, a 30-year reunion event? And he said, well, let me get back with the planning committee. And he told me who the planning committee members were, some who I knew. Mike Taylor was on the committee. So I contacted Mike Taylor and I told him my idea and that I had talked to Gary, and we got together, and then eventually they had a meeting of the planning committee for the it was called the STIC conference, Smalltalk International Conference, Smalltalk International Conference, that had been running for I think 7 or 8 years before, every year, annual conference, and that it would be in 2013 would be in Phoenix in the summer, or in June, I think. And so I proposed to the conference committee, let's do a reunion event. And they said, what about at the banquet? We'll have a banquet and we'll have presentations and we'll have a good time and reminisce, and people will talk about their work from 30 years ago and whatnot. So we organized that and we had it. And their videos are online. There are videos on YouTube of all the talks. One of the people brought a video camera and just videoed informally. So they're not, the highest quality videos, but they're there, and you can see the presentations and you can see what we talked about. And Tom Love was very active in that conference. And so I hadn't literally seen him face to face in 30 years, but I saw him at the conference and we had talked beforehand, and he brought his quilt that he had made from T-shirts from software conferences in the past, and he displayed that at our event. And he talked about the early days and talked about our relationship, beta testing, Smalltalk 80, and all of that. And I also gave a talk at the conference about how I was able to, how I created the commercial product and marketed it. And so that presentation is, the video, I believe, is online also. And I have, of course, the slides from all of it. And yeah.
So it's when we talked to Tom, he basically said that you were essentially his tech support.
Yes.
So you were the developer, you were the marketer, and you were the tech support for the product.
Yes. And the evangelist. Evangelizing Smalltalk, whatever. You know how I've told you stories, I tell people stories. Well, once I was the quietest, most introverted person until I saw Smalltalk and realized it needed to get out into the world. So I basically taught myself. I read, I paid attention to everybody's talks and everybody's marketing and every software magazine, everything I could, any magazine where you see how to present a product and how to talk about it and how to teach it. And I'm a teacher at heart, so that was the easy part. I offered Smalltalk classes that had a combination of software engineers and their managers who had never touched a computer before. And I had to teach them all at the same time how to use Smalltalk. And so what I did is I recruited the people that kind of already knew it to teach the other software people while I sat down with the managers, because the managers made decisions on buying the stuff. So I sat down with them and spoke to them, and I would figure out what language they, how much technical background they had, and then word things in such a way. And with Smalltalk, that's easy. It's easy to talk about it. So I could talk to anybody about it. So I came out of my shell, and now you can't shut me up. No, really, because I believed in it so much, and I just wanted it to get out there so badly that I just would talk to anyone who would listen.
We had gotten away from talking about you working with Kurt.
Yes. Kurt did a demo videotape of Analyst that we used as a marketing tool. And it was a 17-minute videotape that was an excellent demonstration. And I would hand them out as a to people as a marketing tool. And so I gave the museum a copy of that. And on the videotape, it's a VHS tape, my husband was able to get our old VCR working in 2013 and play it and record it onto whatever online. And we did an excerpt of it, a short version that was shown at the STIC conference. But I have the entire 17 minutes, stored on my Dropbox. But I don't have any permission to release it, so I would love to be able to release that.
Talk about the Humble expert system.
Well, Kurt Pearsall was one of the primary developers of the Analyst. But he had such a great sense of humor, and there was a group of us that would go to lunch together almost every day. So, and we had a lot of restaurants in Pasadena that we could walk to or drive to. Like the original Acapulco was there. Right across the street from us was the original Panda Inn, from which Panda Express came. The Acapulco restaurant, which I don't know how far that is, but in Southern California, it's a chain, and it was right on Colorado Boulevard. So we love to eat Chinese food, Mexican food, all different things, and we would have to decide, whatever group was going to go to lunch, where would we eat lunch that day? Well, at the same time that this was happening, there were the Interlist D people, the list people at Park, and Kurt knew them well, and I knew Larry Messincher and others very well from my trips to Park, and they would visit, some of them would visit us, and so there's a lot of, and we'd take them to lunch, so we got to know them. And so one of them threw down the gauntlet to Kurt, and they said, I challenge you to develop an expert system shell in Smalltalk in 24 hours. And Kurt said, challenge accepted. So in 24 hours, he had the expert system shell. And he was boasting about it. And he said, I won that bet. His head was so big that we decided to call it Humble. And so he wrote on his whiteboard, H, period, U, period, MBLE. And then he came up with what each letter meant that sounded like professional in some way, that it was software, acronym. But the name remained Humble, all caps, trademarked, and he kept that whiteboard, that center of his whiteboard, with those for years. He never erased it. So that was a running joke that we had. And I sold it as a commercial product. And I had $1,000 marketing budget for advertising. Oh, I could use it any way I wanted. And I decided we were going to sell Humble, right? AI Expert was a brand new magazine. And their first edition was about to be published. And it cost $1,000 to place a half-page ad. So I placed a half-page Humble ad. And of course, Kurt helped me design the screen. We took a picture of a screen with Humble on it, and he designed that for me. And he wrote the text about what the ad should say. And he had a good mind for selling things too. He knew how to explain things, and he had a good sense of humor. And so we made an engaging little half-page ad. I thought it was pretty darn good. First ad I had ever created and placed. And then I blew my whole $1,000 budget. We sold so many copies of Humble after that, we could barely, poor Laura, who had to prepare everything for shipment, was so busy for a while. That ad worked. That's the only ad we ever placed anywhere for any of these products. So that's a story.
Well, this was, the 80s was, the big debut of expert systems,
Yes,
right?
it was.
And it was the main driver for AI.
Yes.
So, well, this is interesting because this was spurred on by the Interlist D group. Did they also have an expert systems solution that was implemented in Interlist D?
Yes. Those were the people that challenged Kurt to do it in Smalltalk. Of course.
So did you ever know?
And he said it's a piece of cake in Smalltalk. They had a competition going, Interlist versus Smalltalk. The people, it was fun. It was a friendly competition,
So did you ever know, what the relative sales figures of their expert system versus yours?
No. No. I don't even know if they were I don't know anything about that. And all I know is that the workstations were bundled with Interlist D, but they also paid an extra $5,000 to get Smalltalk. Almost every single customer. Well, when you're spending $55,000 for something, an extra five, you usually can get it approved for that budget. So, but they did, and mostly they were using, well, a lot of those customers I know because I had to support them. So I know they were using it. They may have been using both. They may have only been using Smalltalk or only Interlist, but it seemed like most everybody was using Smalltalk one way or the other. So I would get calls for support and help and questions. And they would call up and, or if I wasn't in my office, the switchboard would answer and they would ask, can we please speak to Smalltalk customer support? And they would say, oh, well, Evelyn's at lunch. Because I was the only one doing customer support for Smalltalk, for the commercial product. That was just me.
And how many of those customers were also running the applications?
I don't know, because a lot of them were government customers and I didn't have the need to know. I didn't have clearances and I don't know how many they had. I don't know who they were. Now I know a lot about generally who they were, but I still to this day don't know how many copies. I don't know any of that.
Right. But do you know, well, Humble didn't need a security clearance, right? So do you know?
No. So Humble was just a separate thing that Kurt developed and we sold because expert systems were popular and people wanted to play with it. If they had Smalltalk, this was an easy way for them to play with an expert system. And by the way, we used that expert system to figure out where to eat lunch each day because he input the information about people's preferences. If so-and-so's going, they don't like Chinese food. If this person's going, they don't want anything spicy and blah, blah, blah. And then it would spit out an answer, this is where you should go to, this group should go to lunch. That was why, that's how we used it internally.
That's hilarious. It's like such an over-engineered.
It is. The whole thing is hilarious. We laughed so much over that. That's why he left the Humble on the whiteboard for years. I mean, I don't think it got erased until he left the company in 1988. Yeah. I missed him so much. And I saw him recently, We were I brought him to the museum and we reconnected and it was fabulous to get back together with him and talk with him.
But again, you don't know like which companies or government agencies were using Humble and for what purpose?
No, I have no idea.
Okay.
It would go out the door and I didn't support it. That was Kurt and I didn't know who was buying it. Laura would be the one shipping it. And I would just get a report on how many were sold each month. In my archives, it's possible I have those records, but I have a feeling not because I took out 16 boxes and I only kept 6 at home and the other 10 got tossed out. They were stored at my husband's company and when he sold his company, he just threw them away. I said, it's okay because if I haven't needed them, in all this time, I guess I don't really need them. But that was before I started really talking with you at the museum. So, but there might have been some records in there. And it's possible that I haven't gotten all the way to the bottom of my archives. So I might have some files that talk a little bit about the number of units sold and all of that. Maybe. And if I do, absolutely, I'll provide them to you.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so you mentioned the analyst and also the analytic spreadsheet package. So was that something on top of the analyst or was it a separate application?
Analyst was a series of whole bunch of applications integrated together into one information management processing system. It wasn't just an app, it was a whole system of apps that were integrated. So in a spreadsheet, you could have a map and you could have hyperlinks. And you could have any kind of data referencing any other kind of data. And you can imagine why the intelligence community would be very interested in an application that could do that. All of that cross-referencing. You can imagine how powerful that was. That was early. That was, I don't think there was anything.
So there was a hypertext system in this?
Yes. And one of the things that Alan Kay was most impressed about that we developed in Pasadena at XSIS was the spreadsheet package, because any cell in a spreadsheet could have any kind of data in it. It could have a map. It could have a publication. It could have, like a normal spreadsheet, some computation. It could have graphics, drawings. It could be an animation. It could be anything in those spreadsheet cells. And this really got Alan Kay's attention, because no one had done that before, or maybe since. I don't know. I don't know if that exists now. I don't use spreadsheets, but back in the day I did. But I've been retired. I don't have a need for that. But the power of that, and the information in the analyst could be referenced in so many different ways, in a map, in a spreadsheet, in a document, in a database. They had a world map. They had I can't remember what they called it. They didn't call it Facebook, but it was like it was like people. It was a system of profiles of people.
So it's a directory.
A directory of some kind, but it had not just names, address, phone numbers, this employment history, or whatever they had. I don't know what kind of records they kept. But it could have graphics and images and videos, and maybe not videos back then, but whatever, data. Any format of data could be referenced and manipulated and updated and combined with other data and queried and in any way you wanted. And the analyst demo video gives you a flavor of that. And so it's very useful to see that demo and to know what year that was created in. It was around the 87, 88 timeframe when we were really actively selling analyst as a commercial product at the government's request. There was a sanitized commercial version that that they approved for us to sell commercially.
So I guess maybe we come to you leaving Xerox.
Yes.
Then that was in 92.
In 1985 to 88, that's when Park Place Systems was spun out from Park. So Smalltalk 80, as a commercial product, was by people in what was the research group at Park who were doing Smalltalk. There were people in that group that wanted to spin it off into a separate company and be involved with that business. There were others who were researchers. And once it became a commercial product, it was no longer much interest because they wanted to do the next generation of research. So many of those people left Park and went to other companies like Apple. Apple, because of course the Steve Jobs demo and Steve Jobs people knew Dan Ingalls and others, and Alan Kay and Ted Kaler and some of the others, Dave Robson. They left, and some of them ended up at Apple. Maybe not right away. I think some went to Atari. I think Alan Kay went to Atari.
Yeah, and then,
but I don't know who went where when. But there was dispersal of the researchers to different companies.
Yeah, but Alan ended up at Apple at one point.
He did.
Dan was at Apple.
And Dan.
Ted was at Apple.
And Ted.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And they're still working together at Alan Kay's company, Viewpoint Research. And they're still, working as a team with others now. And I'm, in touch with all of them. I had never met Alan Kay in person. And I was so sad when I went to the Smalltalk launch event in 1983. He had been there, but I never got to see him. He left the event before I got to meet him, and I never had another opportunity. So until 2014, there's a conference at Chapman University. And what it was a one-day conference honoring Ted Nelson, the father of hypertext, hyperlinking, hypertext. And rumor had it that Alan Kay was going to speak at that conference in tribute to, it was a tribute conference for Ted Nelson. Ted Nelson's assistant is someone that I knew who was helping me with early days of starting a Smalltalk philanthropy. And he told me about the conference and said, "You want to come with me?" And I said, "Of course I do." So we went there together, and Alan Kay did not come. He sent a video instead. But you know who came in his place? Steve Wozniak. And I got to sit next to Steve Wozniak the entire day with his wife, had lunch together, went to the conference together, and Steve Wozniak spoke at the conference. But I got to chat with him and tell him about the story of Mark and I buying the Apple II, and that first thing we did was program in BASIC. And what he said is he was so excited about BASIC, his implementation of BASIC. We were so impressed with it. In 48K of memory, he had BASIC running, and it was an excellent implementation, and it was so easy to use. We have a WASPack. WASPack is a sheaf of papers, some of which were typewritten and then Xerox copied, but also had handwritten notes in pencil. Some of them were penciled onto the copy, and others were copied on others were penciled onto the original that was then copied. We got one of those sheaf of papers, and it was all kinds of inside information about the Apple II, written by Woz. Well, that's why it's called the WASPack, and we have it at home. And I told Woz we had the WASPack, and he said, "Cool." But the thing he was most excited about was that the first thing we did was use his BASIC. So today I am wearing the same sweater and the same necklace that I wore in 2014 at that conference. And my profile picture on LinkedIn, the picture is from that conference. And I've posted pictures of me with him at that conference. And since then, I've been working on starting a foundation that I call Smalltalk Foundation. And it has 5 enterprises, each represented by a star. So I'm wearing my star earrings. So I'm wearing my brands today, as I do, because I find jewelry a useful way to do that. Because my logo for my Smalltalk Foundation was derived by scanning in this actual piece of jewelry. And my husband is a graphic artist, and so am I. But he knows Photoshop very well and rendered exactly what I wanted for the logo from that.
So going back to leaving Xerox, so you were talking about the spin out of Park Place.
Yes, and it took 3 years to spin it out because being Xerox and being complicated, it took a while. But all those times, every year was the OOPSLA conference, and I would be there representing XSIS along with people like Kurt Pearsall and others, and we'd have a booth at the conference demonstrating the workstations with Smalltalk on them, and also giving talks at the conference. And Kurt gave a talk on I believe it was analytic spreadsheet package at one of the conferences, and a talk about the analyst at another one. And so that went on. And then when Park Place spun out, their workstation that they used was the Sun RISC-based workstation for their products. That was their primary workhorse workstation. And so they were selling the Sun version. That was all transferred, and the virtual image that I had engineered, created as the commercial product, was transferred also to Park Place Systems. And I was still marketing it at Xerox in Pasadena, which XSIS, for the Xerox workstations. Still continued to do that until about 1990. And then and I was transferred to the marketing department to do that work because there was no more engineering work that I needed to do. But the group that I'm still working with, the same people, the same software engineers that were still working on Analyst and the spreadsheet package and Humble and other things that came along too. So, and then they were also the versions of Analyst, the new versions of Analyst. The government was using the Sun workstations also. And so the government people, customers, had a close relationship with Park Place Systems after it spun off, as well as maintaining a relationship with our group because we were developing. I wasn't, but the other people were developing their applications.
So, so wait, then Xerox continued to own the analyst.
Yes.
So Park Place never owned the analyst.
I don't know, because I know that the government customers were visiting Park Place all the time, and I don't know.
I mean,
I don't.
So maybe they needed Park Place because Park Place provided the Smalltalk, but they were also running the analyst, which was provided by Xerox, or was Park Place actually providing?
No. Park Place did not sell analysts at that time.
Xerox was still selling the analyst.
Xerox was selling the analyst.
Okay,
as
but
a
it was
commercial
running
product.
on Park Place's Smalltalk.
Yes. It was ported, to that to their version that ran on the Sun.
Right.
Yes, for that government customer.
Right.
So
Which was originally based on your version.
yes.
Yeah.
Initially, it was my version, lock, stock, and barrel, transferred by my management to them. We're all Xerox, what Xerox owned it.
Yeah.
They could do what they wanted with it, and they chose to spin off, Xerox as a company chose to spin off Park Place Systems and give them that software. So then basically I was out of a job because the work I was doing on the engineering side no longer existed.
Right, but you said that you were now transferred to marketing.
I was marketing.
Right.
And I would give demos and give classes and create marketing materials and work with the marketing department, both here in Pasadena, but also in the Washington, D.C. area. And I would travel there and go to conferences and sometimes give demos, presentations. And I worked closely with the marketing people on the East Coast, to do that work to support our government contract customers. And then they no longer needed me for that. And I don't know what happened between 1990 and 1992 in that area. I don't remember because I was no longer working directly with the Smalltalk product. They assigned me to be a project manager for some encryption software that was being done on the East Coast. I think they gave me that job because I was still there and they didn't have anything else for me. And then in 1999,
So then was it because officially they were no longer supporting any of the Smalltalk applications, or what?
No, I wasn't involved in supporting the Smalltalk applications.
Oh, okay.
I was not doing software work anymore. I was only doing marketing work. And when I was marketing the platforms, the Xerox workstation versions and the other Sun workstation version, that was my job. But then the Sun workstation got transferred over and no one was buying the Dolphins and Dorados anymore. It was Sun.
Oh, okay.
So there was really nothing left for me to do in the Smalltalk area. I wasn't doing application work.
Okay.
And then I was no longer selling the virtual image and virtual machine. So there wasn't any of that work left for me.
But it took 2 years for that, because Park Place spun out at the end by '88. So it took 2
these
years
things
for
didn't
that.
happen overnight.
Yeah.
And Park Place Systems had to get up and running and get their stable platform and all that work. It took time.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would say roughly in the 1990 time frame, I'd say 1990. It was about that time frame when I was basically just project manager for some people and we had they did a good job on their software. They didn't really need me, but they had no other work for me. And there was no other, I wasn't working on the application side and they didn't need me for that. Plus I had no clearances, so I wasn't allowed to. You had to have top secret clearance and go down in the basement in the vault to work on that secret part. And the commercial version was it was stable, so there was no more work needed on it. I never worked on the commercial version of Analyst. Right. I wasn't doing any applications after PubEditor prototype. I was doing the virtual image. So in 1991, there was the Clarence Thomas Supreme Court Justice hearings in October. And that's when the term sexual harassment in the workplace was discussed. And that was a hot topic of discussion in companies around the country. It was a new concept. There was a lot going on. A lot of women were either already had or were inspired to sue their companies for sexual harassment. And I worked at Xerox, which was a very progressive company and very open-minded and very supportive. However, I also worked in a division that was a government contract house, and it was different from the typical divisions in Xerox. So I worked with a lot of men, very few women working there. But the men kind of got nervous about all of this and were looking at themselves, whoa, have I done anything to offend the women I work with? And none of the engineers had. I had no problems at all working with the engineers. We all respected each other's knowledge and worked well together. I have no complaints at all about that. It was more senior management and marketing people. One of the marketing people, when I got transferred to the marketing department, the first thing he said is, oh, we have a propeller head in our department now. That's the first time I'd ever heard that term. He called me a propeller head. And I laughed and I said, okay, I guess I'm a propeller head. I'm a nerd, yes. I embrace that concept. I'm proud of it. Get used to it, And you could be coming to me when you get some technical questions you can't answer. So he said, yeah, you're right. So that was fine. But then my boss, it was a different story, my supervisor. The first thing he did, he asked me when I was transferred to his department. They moved me upstairs and he sat me in his office. First he closed the door and then he opened the door again and said, well, we can't do that because we don't want people to talk. Then he said, so when are you planning to have children? And all the alarm bells went off in my head because I had never experienced anything like that before. So I went to the HR department because that's what Xerox said. If you have any issues to report about any kind of problems, harassment, please go to the HR department and it will be confidential. So I went to the guy in our HR department and told him my story. And the first thing he did, I even saw him running upstairs to go tell my management in the marketing department what I had told him, to watch out for me. So it just didn't get much easier after that. I pretty much ignored, and I was cautious. And on business trips, I would be meeting people on the East Coast, and they were what I would call more like old guard Xerox people, who are the progressive types, who are very conscious of treating people with respect and the Xerox way. When Pasadena Government Contract House, they were separate. Their work was secret, a lot of it. They had a different accounting system, and they often didn't follow all the rules to the letter that the corporation had. They were afraid that I would report them. I never would. I'm a loyal employee, and I figure if something is too uncomfortable or doesn't work, then I will just leave. I don't belong there. But what happened after that, the men wouldn't talk to me, including my colleagues, and in the software. The women kept telling me, and there weren't very many of them, but saying, you should sue Xerox. You should sue for the way they treated you. And I said, I don't want to do that. Then I'm just a pawn in some lawyer's, they see Xerox, they see dollar signs, and they see me as a way to get that money. And I don't know any lawyers, and I don't want to be involved with that. So in January of '92, Xerox Corporation, the whole corporation worldwide, offered a voluntary reduction in force called a VRIF, which is basically, Xerox was a great company to work for. I loved the company. I loved the company culture. I loved their when they remade themselves after the Japanese competition with their leadership through quality, and we learned meeting management skills. They had excellent training. I took advantage of all the management training that I could, And if you wanted to go get a master's or a PhD, they would pay for it. It was just one of the most wonderful companies to work for. But they offered the VRIF, and one of the rules is the company volunteers. And if their supervisors need them, if they're mission critical, then the supervisor can say, no, we need them. They can't leave. They can't, leave us. But in my case, my management volunteered me to take the voluntary. They told me I should take it. And there was one person in management who I trusted, and I went to him and asked for his advice, and he advised me, he said, they don't want you here. They don't have a place for you here. And you should move on to some place that will appreciate you more. And he was a great person. And I took his advice, and I took the VRIF. And I left. They walked me out the door on Valentine's Day of 1992, but they let me do something that they didn't let other employees do. And by the way, no one said goodbye. And I had to anytime someone would leave the company, I would organize a goodbye luncheon. Kurt Pearsall, when he left in 1988, we went to the local restaurant. I have the photos. I showed him the photos recently from his going away party and the gifts and the balloons and everything. Yeah, so no one said goodbye to me, and but they let me take 16 boxes of files, my archives, because I'm a pack rat. I save everything. In fact, my supervisor in the engineering department, he was terrible at organizing. So I kept all of his records for him, and I advised him when he needed them. And I wrote I also created all his presentations and did all that for him. So I think because this manager was on my side, I think he told them to let me take my stuff. None of it was classified, obviously. I had no security clearance. So the guard helped me take 16 boxes to my car, and I left, and I never looked back. And I was very burned out from the whole experience. For years, there had been incidents that had been difficult to deal with. I was exhausted, so I was able to retire. So I retired from Xerox, I retired from software engineering, and I just switched gears. I took some time to recover, and then I pursued my interests. I pursued my love of fiber arts and became a knit crochet teacher, designer. I also learned to quilt and sew, and I was a teacher teaching that. I do art quilts. But at the same time, I became a community organizer in Glendale because we had very low water pressure in our neighborhood, and we needed to fix that problem. So I went down to the city and organized. And this was the first time in the city of Glendale that they had planned to fix the low water pressure problem in a neighborhood. Was my neighborhood, my street. The pipes were from the 1920s, and they were clogged, and so it required coordinating with the Glendale Water and Power and all of the other city departments, plus the fire department, the police department, and have meetings with all the neighbors, because they had to close down the street from 8 to 5 every day for a whole week in order to dig up the pipes and do the work that they needed to do. So I helped organize that whole thing. And in that process, I heard about a job at the city to be a fundraiser for Glendale Youth Alliance, which is a nonprofit that employs at-risk youth to keep them out of gangs, to keep them in school, help them graduate high school, and get scholarships to college. So I thought, that's right up my alley. I love teaching. I love working with youth. And I initially was hired as fundraiser for a part-time job. But my supervisor was a very nice person, but a micromanager, and it was hard to report to her. I had, so many more years of experience than she did. She was much younger, and so I did what she asked me to do, but then I resigned and volunteered to be on the board of directors, which was more suitable to my interests. And then I was, doing similar work, but with other people from the community, so I could network and meet business leaders and the local politicians and the city council and the mayor and the fire department chief and the police chief and everyone, and work with them, and even got my husband to help out with events. He was the photographer for their events and so on. So I learned fundraising, I learned philanthropy, And I started my own knitting guild. Met someone, Judy, in 2003 at the local yarn shop where I was teaching. And I said, you want to start a knitting guild? And she came in with her 2 kids, and I saw her work, and we just hit it off. And she said, yes, I do. So she helped me, and we started Jewel City Knitters Guild. And we make things for charity primarily. And we've made about 10,000 items for 30 different charities over the past 21 years. And we still meet every month. And there's a huge table piled full of things that people have made that month to donate to children and babies and families and homeless people and shelters and so on. So that's still going. And so I got a lot of experience with different kinds of philanthropy, small, medium, and large, through the different things that I did.
So you mentioned, being burned out. I mean, you could have, at the time, you could have gotten another job.
I wanted to work in Smalltalk, and there was no Smalltalk work in Southern California. Nothing. And I was too burned out, and we had paid off our home 2 years before. We knew before we got married, we planned to retire young. I started working when I was 11 years old to pay my tuition through elementary school and high school, working for my aunt and uncle, which I mentioned. And so by the time I left at age 36, I'd been working for 25 years. So I just took some time to regroup and recover. There was an incident with a fellow employee on a business trip, bringing him back from an OOPSLA conference. No one told us that he had mental problems, that there had been an incident on a previous business trip up to Park, and he ended up in a hospital in Palo Alto because he went crazy and was getting kind of violent. And no one told any of us about this. I worked in the same office, we had the same, shared an office, worked together for a long time. I knew he was different, strange in some ways, but a lot of software engineers are. We're just, nerds and whatever. And anyway, so he had a security clearance, and when that happened, it was taken away. Then he was not allowed to travel for Xerox anymore under their auspices. So there was an OOPSLA conference in Orlando that year, and it was 1987. And he went there to the conference on his own. He paid for the trip himself. He showed up, surprised us. We knew he wasn't supposed to travel, but we didn't know why. Well, he ended up in a local mental hospital there. He had a problem in his hotel, and the police came and took him there. And so then they called me because everyone had gone home from the conference. Conference was over. And I was the last one left there because I had organized our participation, and I was about to go to Disney World and have some fun before I went home. And they called me, and they said he was okay to travel home, so I changed my flights. I wanted to end up in Burbank because that's where my husband was picking me up. And so I did all that and got him a flight, and unfortunately, it stopped in Chicago, and we had a layover. At the mental hospital, they had told me that he was okay to travel. But it was such a long trip that in Chicago, his medication was wearing off, and he started saying very crazy things. And then when we got on the plane in Chicago, we had to change planes. I told the flight staff that he was having some problems, that if I, put on the light, please come help. I said, I don't expect anything to happen, but you never know. Well, in a commercial plane over near Denver, he really went crazy and got violent, and the co-pilot came out, and some other passengers helped subdue him, and they took me aside, and one of the women on the plane was a nurse, and so she talked to me and asked me, how is your husband doing? I said, no, he's a coworker. And they said, oh, really? You're bringing a coworker home who has these issues? And I didn't know he had these issues. I didn't know. And so what I had done before I left Chicago is I had called Laura, the one who it was the night before. The night before I'd called Laura and said, I have a problem with this person, and can you please see if you can call the guard station? It was at night, late at night, and she was working late, as she often did. And I called her at work, and I said, can you please find out how to get a hold of his parents so I could contact them? And she couldn't find that out. So I said, well, then tell the HR guy and tell him that I'm bringing him into Burbank Airport and he has to meet us at the gate. And I gave her all the information. So anyway, they had to take him off the plane in Denver. They emergency landed the plane in Denver, took him off the plane, and then the flight continued. And it was probably a 2-hour delay for all the passengers. But we arrived at Burbank, and the airport had been closed already for a long time. And so I got through the gate.
So he got back on the plane?
No, they took him off the plane in Denver and took him to a hospital.
Oh, so you
I stayed on the plane.
Okay.
All the passengers stayed on the plane. He was the only one to get off.
Okay.
They called the ambulance. They came and took him away, and then resumed traveling to Burbank from there. And so when I got into the gate, there were 2 people waiting for me, my husband, Mark, and the HR guy. And so I walked up to the HR guy and told him the story. And Mark was standing there in shock. And then I went home. And when I went back to work 2 days later, because this was a Saturday, I got home. Yeah, that was not good. When I got back to work, it's all about, Carrie is out on leave and we all have to fill in. Evelyn, you're going to have to do his work for him because he's not here. And I'm just like, I haven't even mentally processed what just happened. And now they're telling me I have to work harder. And it's like, I was going through PTSD and I didn't know what it was. Back then, I didn't know. And I ended up not being able to sleep or eat or function. And so what I did is I went to my supervisor and I said, I'm burned out. I need to take a leave of absence. I don't know how long, but I will take it with no pay and I'll come back. And he said, okay, no problem. And then I was out for 3 months and I saw a psychiatrist, learned what was going on with me. And he explained it in scientific terms because I'm a scientific person. And he explained, what I was going through and that it was not surprising that I was having these issues. And so he was a very good therapist. And I recovered and went back to work. And people made fun of me for being out on vacation for 3 months. And then it got difficult again about a year later. So this time I went out on disability because I knew what was happening to me. I understood it and that I still needed more rest and help. And they were not treating me very well. So I left again and came back. So probably what happened is that I was the one labeled with a mental illness and I was someone to be watched and so on and so forth. And I have no idea if anyone outside of my group in Pasadena knew what was going on with me. In other words, I don't know if the park people knew what was going on. I don't know to this day. And I explained it to him after I came back. I explained what happened. But I have no idea what people thought of me because back then it wasn't stuff you talked about. It was in the late 80s and early 90s, you didn't talk about mental illness and you didn't talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress. It wasn't discussed. And so I don't know. That could have had a very bad deterrent on my career. I don't know.
But at least, so when you retired, you mentioned your husband had a successful business.
Yes.
So you didn't need to work.
I didn't need to work, and we planned for that. When we bought our house in the house we're in now, in 1983, we planned. It was a foreclosure, brand new. It was an unusual situation. When we bought it, the interest rates were 14% for a mortgage, and we got it It was built by an individual who was speculating and never built a home before. And he built his dream home, but it was quite expensive home at the time, and nobody could afford it. It was the most expensive home in Glendale at the time. And because of the interest rates being 14%, it just sat there for 3 years unoccupied. And so we bought it as an opportunity to, because we bought it for what it cost to build, not what they were asking for, the retail price. We bought it from the bank that foreclosed on the builder. And so we got a real deal. And they gave us a 10% interest with the payments amortized over 30 years, but in 7 years we would have to refinance. So what we did is we paid it off in 7 years. My husband was had his own business, and he was selling. It was a company that he started working at part-time when he was in high school. And the original founder of the company, Mr. Fisher, it was R.A. Fisher Company in Glendale, medical electronics manufacturer since the 1920s. He became ill and passed away, and his wife was still at the business trying to run it, though she was not really trained as a businesswoman. But Mark was working there, and he ran the company for her. He started working part-time, then he got into designing because he's software engineer, hardware engineer, self-taught, and he was interested in modernizing all their units that they were selling. And then he also designed units for a Japanese trading company and remade the company for her. And then she passed away, and she left the company to the employees. Before she passed away, she agreed to let him receive royalties for the equipment he had designed. And those royalties are what paid for our house in 7 years. So he had a very modest salary, but he said, I would like, 10% of gross sales. And she said, that sounds good, because I don't want to give you a raise. She didn't understand. But that way, he said, it's no risk to you. If I don't sell any, you don't have to pay me anything. She says, that sounds good to me. So it paid for our house in 7 years. Yes, and it's worth about 8 times what we paid for it back in 1983. It's a hillside view home, and we love it. We love living in Glendale, and we have no plans to ever leave there. So, yeah, and he sold his business when he was 50 years old, so that would mean, I can't do the math in my head. I always forget what year. It was a traumatic year for us. But he decided to sell his business to a competitor who was in the local area. And his brother, Mark's brother, worked for him at R.A. Fisher Company. And so he wanted to make sure that his brother would still be employed. So he sold to a competitor, and his brother worked for the other company until he retired. So it all worked out. And there's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to sell to someone. It's a kind of an obscure, product line. They sold epilators and muscle stimulators, and he did some other specialized equipment for the Japanese company. He even did a programmable oscilloscope and a OOPSLA. It was some kind of instrument, very technical, and he designed the hardware and the software for it, and for this Japanese trading company. So he was doing a lot of different things that weren't even related to R.A. Fisher Company. But the sales were, benefited his company as well as he got royalties. So yeah. And he knew he needed to do that because we bought this house, and even though we put down a very high down payment, we wanted to pay it off quickly and not have to refinance. Because when we got married, our goal was to, what they call is FIRE now, financial independence, retire early. But this was back in the 80s we got married in 78. So this was something that we talked about doing even before we got married. We wanted to retire young and then pursue our other interests. And that's what we did. So I retired at age 36 and been working for 25 years. And then I could do whatever work I wanted to do from then on, don't need a paycheck, and enjoy doing what I do.
And so you mentioned that like you hadn't touched Smalltalk in however many years,
Right.
but then the 30-year anniversary came around
Yes.
and you kind of got back into it.
Well, I got some demos from Dan Ingalls and Ted Kaler, who came to the conference, of Squeak, which they developed, which is an open source version of Smalltalk that anyone can download on their phone or laptop or whatever. And still working with Alan Kay on that and other things. And saw Tom Love again and Michael Malcolm. I worked with him at XSIS, and he and his wife Nadine came to the event and then visited me at my home, at our home afterwards. They were driving through the area and came to visit. So it was a way to touch base with a lot of my colleagues from the past and the special people. And I recently got back in touch with Kurt, and I've located some other people. And unfortunately, Michael Malcolm passed away last year, but Nadine Malcolm is going to help me launch Smalltalk Foundation.
So talk about the foundation, why you decided to start it.
Well, I decided to start it in 2013, and I announced it in 2014 at the ESUG conference in Cambridge. That's the European Smalltalk User Group annual conference that I had never attended before, but I made the trip to Cambridge because it moves around, and it was at Cambridge that year. And I had already done some work to possibly look into starting a 501c3 for Smalltalk Foundation. And the purpose of it, we had a committee of people, including Mike Taylor, who I mentioned before, and some other people, who we designed 5 enterprises that we would put together in the Smalltalk Foundation. It was kind of like a long-term plan for a philanthropy that would get, the 5 enterprises were TEACH is the acronym, TEACH, technology, education, arts, community, and history. And I had already started working on history, Smalltalk history. But my goal always has been to get more women in software engineering and computer science and help them get a career in the field and stay in the career. Now, I had a lot of help getting my career. There wasn't an issue back then as much for women in the field. When I started, there were about 40% of the people in this country in software engineering and computer science were women. But then it went down from there. Once I looked again in 2012 and saw that maybe there were only like 10%. And what happened, there was a Gamergate around that time. It was after then, but it was maybe like 20%, and then it went down to 10% because of the Gamergate issue, where the women were, playing the online video games, and before it had been mostly young men, and there was issues with that, and so a lot of the women were drummed out of the industry because of that, and other issues that happened in the workplace for women. And I studied that, and I noticed recently it's gone up to about 25%, because since I started working on the Smalltalk Foundation concept back in 2013 and 14, there have been a lot of other organizations that have started up or were already there and have expanded, like Society of Women for Women Engineers and WITI, which is Women in Technology International. And there are other, Anita Borg Institute, and I've researched all those organizations. So in the past, I was thinking, we'd have to have a 501c3 and have all that infrastructure and be able to fundraise and manage the money and do reports. It's complicated. It's very complicated and expensive, and I didn't really want to do it that way. Then what happened in my personal life, 4 people passed away in my family, on my husband's side and on my side, very close family members. We lost my mother-in-law, my mother, my brother-in-law, and my cousin, who was my best friend growing up. And we were the same age, and she was the one that lived in Beverly Hills, and we would see each other and go shopping together and go do fun stuff. She passed away. So we were in charge of handling a couple of the estates for Mark's family, for his mother and for his brother, his older brother. And we had a lot of challenges. His mother had dementia for 10 years before she passed, and we were her primary caregivers together. And she ended up in a nursing home and then passed away from there peacefully. Then Mark's brother, Jerry, older brother, passed away. It was a very difficult situation because we kind of knew he was a hoarder. He had a home that he wouldn't let us step inside of for like 20 years. And so we suspected that he was a hoarder, but we went to see him one day, and he never let us inside the house, but he would always come out and see us. So we rang the doorbell, he didn't come out. So we called his best friend and said, do you know what's happening with Jerry? And she said, no, I was supposed to get together with him. I came to his house and he never answered his front door. And so we called the sheriff's department because Jerry was a volunteer with the sheriff's department. So we called his partner there, and he came over and brought the police and brought the fire department, and they had to break into his house, and it took them half an hour to find a path to get into the house to find him, that he had passed away in his bathroom. And so we had to deal with all of that emotional baggage of him passing away suddenly and not, unexpectedly, but then also clearing the house and handling his estate. He had left his will handwritten on a single piece of paper taped to the refrigerator. His kitchen was not functional. You couldn't even barely get to it, but it was taped to the side of the refrigerator. And so we had to handle all of that, and it took 2 years to get through that process. So the other, we were just busy with our personal life. And so I told the people that I'd been working with on Smalltalk Foundation what had happened. It was when Jerry died that it was really, I said, we have to handle this, and I can't work on this right now. I don't know if I'll ever come back to it. But I decided, one thing that spurred me to come back to it was Computer History Museum. It was, I think, a couple years ago, 2 Novembers ago, 2022, when you had the Fellows event at which Adele Goldberg and Dan Ingalls were awarded fellowship. And I was going to travel here to be here in person for that, but I couldn't. Mark had a medical issue, so I stayed home, and together we watched the event live streamed. And when I saw their speeches, it just brought back all the feelings, all the memories, the wonderful things. And I thought, you know what? I really need to get back to doing Smalltalk Foundation. I'm not done with that. And now it doesn't have to be difficult. There doesn't have to be a 501c3 because these organizations like Society of Women Engineers have a website where they can help you with the financial end of it. They have the 501c3. They can give you a web page on or a section in their website where they can collect the money from your fundraising, manage it, take a cut from it, say 15%, and let the money go to wherever you want it to go. And so there doesn't need to be all that infrastructure. It can just be a group of people. Initially, I think the mentorship is the more important part rather than the scholarship. But scholarship is something I want to do, working with my high school, Immaculate Heart High School, which was one of those 4 years there were some of the most special years of my life. The way that school is unique and is really preparing young women for any kind of career they want. And so home base for Smalltalk Foundation can be that high school, and I've already met with them. And they're very open to the idea and would like to work with me and my group on fundraising and I also can go teach some knitting and crochet classes there again. They have an instructor there I could be a guest in their class. And they can make things and sell for fundraising. And they could be the initial recipients of scholarships, but also mentorship is to start mentoring in high school, help them through college, mentor them throughout their career, and continue on and give them the support they need. And there are groups like SWE, Society of Women Engineers, and WITI that do this kind of work. But I wanted to make it specific to the people I know from the Smalltalk world. And there are what I call the women of Smalltalk, which is like Nadine Malcolm, who was the wife of Mike, who was a Smalltalker. There's the Alan Werfsbrock and Rebecca Werfsbrock. So Rebecca, and they're still working in the field, I believe. And Alan Werfsbrock is active with, I think it's either IEEE or SIGPLAN or both, and is still working on, OOPSLA still exists as a conference. It's under SPLASH, and they have the OOPSLA portion of the conference. It's every year. It's been continuous, and he's still involved with it, and he was one of the original planners of the conference. So was Rebecca. They both came to the event in Phoenix in 2013, so I reconnected with them. And so I have a sort of a side venture I'd like to start up is called TWOS, TWOS, the Women of Smalltalk. And I posted that on my LinkedIn profile. And the motto would be the power of twos, the powers of two. And basically use that as kind of like tell stories and talk about, because some of them have managed to stay in the industry, and the way they did it is by having their own companies or their own ventures. And to see if they're interested in I know they're so active and so busy already, but it's just an idea that I'd like to pursue and see if there's any interest in that, and have it associated with Smalltalk Foundation as just another part of it.
So we have only 8 minutes left, so
Yes.
I do want to ask a couple more questions, but I just want to clarify that, so the Smalltalk Foundation has two primary missions. There's preserving Smalltalk history,
Yes.
and they're supporting women in technology.
That's the current idea that I have, and I'm ready with two other people for sure who are going to be on the launch committee. And that is Nadine Malcolm, and it is Michelle LaHaye Hammonds, who was my best friend in high school. She was a math major, mathematician, but she changed careers and went back to school in computer science and has had a long-term computer science career. And we've reconnected last year, and she's very interested. And she lives in Virginia. She's very interested in working on it with me. And I've also been in touch with Larry Macinter, because he's done a lot of work to open source Lisp, Medley, InterLispD, all of that. And he's had experience starting and running a 501c3, even though I don't really need to go down that path now. But he has some ideas, and has some experience in open sourcing software and in working with people to get that to happen. So he's an advisor for that.
So maybe talk really quick about how we can help to increase and retain women's participation in the tech industry.
I think mentorship is a key. I think you need more than one mentor. You need different kinds of mentorship throughout your career. And I think this applies to anyone, not just women. I think it's just a good idea. But I see the need for women because there are certain challenges. Unfortunately, this still happens. Often, someone who wants to major in computer science or software will go to school, and maybe they don't have a good experience in school, so they drop out. So there's that. Sometimes they finish school and start a career. But then what happens? What if they get married? What if they have a child? And often for a woman, it's an issue. Not always. It's better in some companies, but it's not in others. So they need guidance and through their life and career in how to maintain that career if that's what they choose to do. They shouldn't be drummed out of the industry because of some external factors. They need help. They need some help to stay. Now I had a mentor until I didn't, and then that First, it made my dream career a dream come true, and then it ended my career, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I want that to not happen to other women, and I really initially want to focus on that, although I am now mentoring a young man in New York who is majoring in computer science at City University of New York. And I met online through LinkedIn because he's a summer intern at JPL on the Europa Clipper mission, and he came to Pasadena with all the other 40 summer interns and saw that I did work at JPL and I was an intern and I did all these things that we had in common. And he contacted me through LinkedIn direct message saying, can we meet when I'm here in town? And I said, absolutely. And so we're in touch now. We schedule phone calls and we ask each other questions. I want to know what it's like for someone like him to be studying in that field now. It's all different. It's all completely different. I've been trying to find out more about that. And then he's learning about the history that I went through and how we got to where we are today and how things have changed. And they've changed so much. And one of my missions is to bring back software engineering. The engineering part seems to have been forgotten, and it's not really being taught in the same way that it was back in the day. It's all different now. And it's not in a good way, in my opinion. So that's one of my missions. It's nothing to do with the women, nothing. It's more the tech and how it's taught and how it's practiced. Doesn't seem to be beta testing. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of debugging anymore. There's just huge apps that are constantly being updated on your phone or whatever. And why are they so big and bloated and so on? And what happened to quality? What happened to testing? What happened to customer support? Those are my big questions right now, and I want to delve more into that and help that area.
So to end, what advice would you give to a young person starting in the industry today?
I would say try to find a mentor. And I think it's much easier to find a mentor nowadays than it was in the past. Because in the past, you kind of had to rely on either people that worked at your company or people you knew from college, or maybe people you might have met at a conference if you moved around, if you were out there. Now we have online, and I find LinkedIn very professional, very useful. I haven't found any serious problems with using it. I'm not on any other social media platform, only that. And I started on it years ago, more than a decade ago, to connect with people, to find people, and I did. And now I have almost 10,000 connections, and in everything I'm interested in, and I'm interested in many things, besides just the software stuff. A lot of other interests, space program and fiber arts and leadership and many things. So that I find that a great outlet, and it's a great outlet for writing a book, which I'm planning to do, which I'm doing. And I am in contact with a lot of other people who have recently written books, even quoted me in one book recently that was published in February. It's about confidence, Coach Yourself Confident by Julie Smith. And it was a post on LinkedIn that she asked if she could quote in her book, and she did. And so I'm promoting her book, and they've inspired me. Those book authors have inspired me to write down my story, because I've told them bits and pieces of it online, and they said, you're a good writer, and you really need to write this all down. So that's what I'm doing. But I say get some mentorship. Find good mentors and not just one. Need different mentors at different times in your life, and you need different kinds for different aspects of what you want to do. And of course, friends, friends. Have good friendships, nurture your friendships, and COVID kind of threw a monkey wrench into our social lives. And I think we're still recovering from that.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Hansen. It's been a pleasure.